Good evening, everyone. I call to order the December 5th, 2022 business meeting of the Cincinnati Board of Education. We welcome everyone and request everyone in the audience to silence your cell phones and your electronic devices. Ms. Wagner, would you please call the roll?
Ms. Bolton?
Present.
Mr. Craig?
Here.
Ms. Jones?
Here.
Dr. Moffitt?
Here.
Mr. Morosky?
Here.
Mrs. Weinberg?
Here.
President Lindy?
Here. Members of the public who are watching online and who wish to speak may do so by clicking the chat button now. The chat feature will be open for your requests for 5 minutes. Please submit your name, your affiliation, your school community, your topic, and your contact information if you would like a direct response to any questions that you might have. Before we move into the superintendent's update, I wanted to ask for two things. The first is just to acknowledge the passing of Dr. Odell Owens, whose funeral was last week. We are going to be sharing a resolution honoring his impact on this school district, particularly in our partnership around the Cincinnati Preschool Promise. And that'll be coming likely at our next full board meeting. We wanted to wait until we could hopefully have the family join us here in person. But I did want to take just a minute in honor of his life and his contribution to say that at the first meeting since his passing. And I wanted to just invite, if there is anybody who, particularly if you worked closely with Dr. Owens, who did want to say something in his memory, I wanted to create a moment where folks could do that. And if not, that's okay. We are going to have the family here and do a resolution honoring at our next meeting. Yeah, Vice President James.
Thank you. I guess I would start by saying I don't describe myself as a personal friend, but more as a personal colleague who has been privy and had the opportunity to receive some of his wisdom. And that was mostly in my role when I was still working as a mental health professional. And he was involved with us. And I would have to say that Dr. Owens is it's sort of a jack of all trades. He was good at many, many, many things. And so just being able to hear him speak so passionately about the work that he was doing at any given point in time, and he's had multiple things, he's had multiple avocations and things that he's done in his life. I want to say that I think that, we'll miss that from someone of his stature, but to be able to be so gifted in many things, including his given profession, I think is an honor. And I certainly think that he will be well remembered and honored for his work in our community.
Thank you, Vice President Jones. And again, more to come with the family at our next meeting. Mrs. Weinberg, and then we're going to.
Yes, I'll be brief. I was a personal friend of Dr. Owens and, of course, his family. I had the pleasure of attending the service. And one thing that I will take, or that I took from the service, is they played this song, and I actually brought the program with me, but it was called I Hope You Dance, and it was a lady who sang it, and it was for Cincinnati State's graduation. And it was just amazing to be able to see Dr. Owens really feel the words of this particular song, and he embodies everything, just all of his work that he did here in the city. I know for me, on a personal level, he gave me a lot of advice. There was an instance, I won't share the story completely, but it was just helping me to find the greatness that I had inside of me and just really making sure that I was always presenting that at all times. So I want to thank him for that. And I just ask that we pray and just have the condolences for his family. So thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Weinberg. We're going to move to our superintendent's update. Any updates? We'll move to that very quickly. So before we start hearing of the public, I understand that we have a couple of guests this evening whom we're recognizing with a resolution that falls later in the agenda. I was going to ask my colleagues up here if there's no objections, once we finish hearing of the public, could we recognize those guests while we have them with that resolution, and then pick up with our regularly scheduled programming?
Yes.
And
That
any
would be great.
concerns?
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll move to hearing of the public. Each speaker will have 2 minutes and direct all comments to the presiding officer. Once a request to speak has been granted, this is for any speakers online, you'll be invited to enter. Please click on the camera icon to go interactive. Provide your name, your affiliation to the district, your school community, your topic, and your contact information if you would like a direct response to any question you might have. This request is consistent with board protocol, and we appreciate your help. In the unusual event that someone is not willing to follow this protocol, we do reserve the right to end that person's time. Again, each speaker will have 2 minutes to speak. When the timer goes off, your time is up. Please refrain from discussing any personnel items. After speaking, you will briefly see the welcome screen again as you transition back to the live stream meeting. Finally, we ask that your public commentary be respectful to all listeners. We'll start with our speakers in person. We have 2. We're going to have Timon West, followed by Kelly Lianza. And maybe if both speakers want to move down to the microphone, that'll help us pick up one and then the other.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
So good to be here and see a bunch of my friends up here. I consider you all friends and allies, and some of you may have heard this story, but I am a Cincinnati native who stayed away for a very long time, decided to move back in 2017 to this city, and part of the reason why is because I was having a conversation with Elisa Hoffman, one of the former board members, about changes in Cincinnati, and she tried to convince me that this was a place I needed to be. I recall that Cincinnati that had passed a resolution some time ago about laws that would prevent LGBTQ folk from having protections, and it was one of the reasons I stayed away. And she told me that the board, that many of you here had passed one of the more progressive equity policies in the country, protecting all of our students, and among them students that were trans and LGBTQ. Right now, there's a state resolution that would propose changes to Title IX in our state, as well as to affirm parental rights. In many cases, affirming the parental rights of some over the parental rights of others. And I believe parental rights means everyone has parental rights, especially in the public school context. I'm just asking you here to vote on a resolution, to write a resolution, to sign your names on to something that would state that Cincinnati will not roll back in time, that we will continue to protect all students. We know that LGBTQs are 3 to 4 times more likely to commit suicide. They are also 3 to 4 times more likely to drop out. And this is because a lot of the rhetoric that we're hearing from threats by the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers to show up at places and stop story time readings from happening affects our students. And I want Cincinnati to maintain the reputation it's gaining as an inclusive place that is welcome to all folks, myself, all parents. And so I thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you very much. For our second speaker, we have Kelly Lianza. Mr. Hoying, while she's getting ready, do we have speakers online tonight? Or Rob? Okay, thanks. Kelly, thank you. Hi.
I am the Walnut Hills Parent Theater Liaison, and I am also a parent of 4 children, all who went to Walnut Hills. And my family has been here for 11 years, and we've been heavily involved in sports and the arts. I'm here because I have questions about the Schedule E and stipend increases. I want to tell you about the theater program. We have 5 productions a year. We serve over 500 students. We're top ranked, and kids have excellent opportunity at college from Walnut Hills High School. I also have over 100 parent volunteers in a school year. I would like it if you guys could respond to these questions. How is the funding formula for Schedule E amounts determined? Why is there confusion over agreed upon stipend increases? Have coaches been paid stipends when fine arts teachers have not been paid? I think this is important because I am concerned for the quality of programming and the possible loss of teachers if funding is not met. And that's all I have to say. I hope you guys think about that and consider that. I did this last year. I just don't understand where the confusion comes from and why I'm doing it again. And, you know, when my teachers come to me and they're begging for funding and they're considering cutting productions, you know, I know what kids that will affect. And I would like you to consider funding our programs fully so that we can run at the quality that we run at today. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Although we don't typically respond in the meeting, I really appreciate speakers, including our most recent one, who left their contact information, and so we'll make sure you get a response to all the questions that you asked. So thank you. So we are now, it sounds, do we have anything online?
Yes, we have one speaker, Allison Goodman. She's online.
Thank you, Mr. Hoying. Thank you, Ms. Goodman.
Hi, everyone. I think I'm connected. My name is Allison Goodman. I am the booster president at Pleasant Ridge Montessori, and I saw that you have a resolution tonight honoring some athletic department people, and I would like to give a special shout out, a thank you, and just express my sincere appreciation for what the athletic department does. We are parent volunteers at our elementary school, and this past weekend had a situation arise where we weren't able to use our school building, and Josh Harden and the athletic department, including Brent Langhorn, kindly set us up at Clark Montessori, and their athletic director, Jeff Wiles, graciously opened his gym for us and set us up with an intern to help us work, and just really welcomed us in, created a partnership where we hope some of our athletes will be able to go at halftime and see Clark students playing, and just really inclusive of our programming that we're trying to do at Pleasant Ridge, and then also showing our students what happens in some of the upper grade levels and what Clark Montessori is able to do. I know they've grown their basketball program this school year, and so just to support Josh and to say what he's doing across our district for athletics is really impactful, and I know he's got great people working under him in a lot of places, and so I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you very much. So that, I believe, Mr. Hoying and Mr. Wilson ends our hearing of the public. Okay, so I think now what we'll do, and appreciate the flexibility of my colleagues around the resolution honoring a couple of guests. I think if we could invite down Mr. Harden, Mr. Moten, I apologize if I got that wrong, and Mr. Donnelly, we will recognize them with a resolution. And while they're coming down, I think what we should do is read the resolution, and then we will motion, second, and vote on it. And I think we'll start with Mrs. Weinberg, and then when she stops reading, if other folks moving down the line would like to read part of that resolution, that would be very helpful. So, okay. Mrs. Weinberg, it's floor is yours.
I'm going to be reading a resolution recognizing CPS Athletic Directors Josh Harden, Jabril Moten, and Tom Donnelly for their recent awards of distinction. Whereas the Board of Education is pleased to recognize 3 employees of the CPS Athletic Department who recently were honored at the Ohio Interscholastic Athletic Administrators Association State Conference for their work earlier this year.
Whereas Josh Harden, as athletics manager for the district, was honored with the Southwest Ohio Athletic Director Association Jim Rolfs Professional Development Award. In his tenure as athletics director, Hardin has significantly increased athletic and extracurricular opportunities for students at all CPS schools. He helped create the AAA pathway, athletic and academic accountability, to support and provide academic mentoring to CPS student athletes. He and his team have significantly expanded athletic participation for CPS junior high and elementary students. During COVID, when athletics were on pause, Hardin mobilized the athletic department to manage and distribute donated goods to CPS families in need. Hardin also led the Speak Up and Speak Out program to give CPS students a forum to discuss experiences with racism and inequality.
Whereas Jabril Moulton, athletic director at Woodward High School, was named Southwest Ohio Athletic Director Association and Ohio Interscholastic Athletic Administrators Association's Athletic Director of the Year, a graduate of CPS's Dater High School. Moulton shared his experience as a college basketball player with students in a variety of coaching positions with CPS. He has served with distinction as Woodward's athletic director since 2017-2018. Moulton is known for helping Woodward students and families with whatever they need, whether it's athletic, academic, or in whatever way he can assist.
And whereas Tom Donnelly, former athletic director at Walnut Hills High School and Clark Montessori High School, was inducted into the Ohio High School Athletic Directors Hall of Fame. During his 9 years at Walnut Hills, Donnelly added 23 athletic teams, including lacrosse and rugby. Donnelly's goal was to create an athletic program that matches the excellence in the school's outstanding academics, music, arts, and theater programs.
Whereas the Board of Education is proud to recognize Mr. Hardin, Mr. Moten, and Mr. Donnelly, and all of CPS's athletic directors, coaches, assistant coaches, and trainers who serve CPS's student athletes.
Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Cincinnati Board of Education that we honor them for their accomplishments and extend to them our congratulations.
So we've not passed it yet. Can I have a motion to adopt this resolution?
So moved.
I'll make the motion.
Thank you, Dr. Moffitt. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Congratulations.
Shake your hands.
So, and before, just for a second, I wanted to ask so a couple last things. Please stay there if you can. I wanted to see Mrs. Weinberg. We have some plaques for them if you'd like to share them with them. And then I was gonna give them a chance if they wanted to say anything, and then we should shake their hands. So if you all would like to come up for just a second, several people would like to shake your hands and say congratulations.
Stand right there.
Half the people are yelling one thing, and half the people are yelling something else. So you're going to shake their hands and say congratulations.
Congratulations.
Congratulations. Thank you very much. Congratulations.
Congratulations. Nice job. Yeah.
Thank you. Glad you could make it. Yeah, thank you.
Oh no! Are we gonna get a picture?
Okay.
Yeah,
Can we
thank
shake
you.
hands first? Thank you. Congratulations. I want a hug. What do you mean didn't get the memo?
So if any of our honorees would like to say a quick something, none of them need to, but if they would like to, I want to invite them for just a second and say thank you again. You just want to make sure there's a button that has a little head with volume coming out of it. If you hit it, your microphone will turn red at the top. Thanks, Jen. We'll get you an assist.
No, thank you.
There we go.
Thank you so much for this recognition. Thank you to all of you for the opportunity I had for 16 years to be an athletic director in the Cincinnati public school system. Transitioned from being a practicing attorney to doing something that I truly loved, which was being with the children, the boys and girls of Cincinnati Public School, and to be some service to them. It's also an honor to be here with these two gentlemen being recognized tonight. At Clark Montessori, we started the athletic program there and grew it to a big, wonderful thing. At Walnut Hills, candidly, I was recruited to come in and fix athletics at Walnut Hills, and we did that. And I'm honored to be here with these two guys because Josh Harden, in particular, played such an important role in all the great things that are happening in this district now. But I know during my tenure at Walnut Hills, he was central to our success there. We got to a point where we were recognized by the Niche Report on public schools as having literally the second best high school athletic program in the state, and they gave us a grade of A+. I'm done, I'm gone, I'm history, but the guy behind me, Josh Harden, made so much of that possible. And I'm so happy for the children of Cincinnati Public Schools that they have somebody here like him to be a leader, to be a supervisor, to be an administrator, because he's excellent at all of those things. He's being recognized for professional development by the state of Ohio and by the Southwest District. And I think that Jabril is just an example of Josh's handiwork and just everything that Jabril brought and brings to the floor for his kids at Woodward. So it's just an honor to be here. I thank you for the time, and go CPS.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'll be quick because I know these meetings can take a little while. So thank you to Board President Lindy and all of our board members for this recognition and this honor, Superintendent and Treasurer Wagner. Shout out to General Counsel Hoying and Chief Murphy for all the support over the years. But just a kudos to my two colleagues behind me as well, Jabril Moten and his great work that he's done at Woodward. And then, as Tom Donnelly said, Tom was the athletic director at Walnut Hills when I was just a junior high basketball coach there. And the assistant athletic director at the time left to advance to Clark High School to be the athletic director there. That was Aaron Zupka at the time. And I had aspirations at the time of being a varsity basketball coach at Walnut Hills High School. That was my dream and goal. And so I was working on that as the junior high basketball coach at the time. And when the position opened up as assistant athletic director, Tom Donnelly did approach me and said, "You have all the skills to be a great athletic director, and you need to take this job as assistant AD at Walnut Hills." I did, and we're here 10 years later, and I'm in a role of district AD where I've been able to impact so many students at Walnut for those 4 years, and been in a position to be able to positively impact and grow athletics and extracurriculars throughout Cincinnati Public Schools. So just wanted to say a special shout to Tom for that recognition and seeing in me and believing in me. But thank you.
Thank you very much.
I had to let those two go first so I could get my thoughts together. But I really want to say thank you to the board and specifically Miss Shauna Murphy, because without her, I probably would not be here. Most of my life, I've kind of like just done what's in my heart in that moment. And with that, I never had aspiration on being an athletic director. I just always did everything that was placed before me at a high level. I got some of that from prep school, some of that from CPS. And with that, the opportunity to become an athletic director came about. I actually said no to myself about 10 times, and I had friends that pushed me forward. So with that, I really just try to instill a lot of those things into our young men and women that I work with and deal with. Our great leader, Josh Harden, Tom Donnelly, I appreciate you for actually pushing and making this happen. Really kind of being in the forefront of making sure that such a thankless job that myself, Josh, many of the CPS ADs and many of the ADs around the country and around the state, it's a very thankless job. So sometimes to hear a thank you refuels our tanks and drives us to do even better and go even higher. And as much as this is appreciated, I really just want to thank every athletic director that I've ever came in contact with, every kid that I've had an opportunity to serve and work with. And again, for the board, ABC, Josh, everybody that's played a role in giving us additional and increasing the resources that we need to help our kids. I appreciate you. And again, one final thank you to Ms. Shauna Murphy. I know you guys may not understand it, but when I say when I have an appreciation for someone who gave me a shot who really didn't have to, because I didn't have the experience, but I took that. I'm working on my CAA, Athletic Director of the Year last year. I actually will be graduating from the University of Cincinnati on Friday at 9:30 a.m. with my master's in sports administration. And all those things are because someone believed in me, even when a lot of times I didn't believe in myself. And I think that's what we strive for in Cincinnati Public Schools, is really showing our kids something that they don't always see in themselves. And even in my adult life, if I didn't have friends that saw something in me and pushed me forward, I wouldn't be where I am at today. So I thank you. I thank my friends. I thank everybody I've ever came in contact with. Just thank you.
Thank you all very, 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 very much. I want to ask, before we get into our next agenda item, approval of the minutes, whether the superintendent had anything she wanted to share at the top of the agenda around a superintendent's update. If not, that's fine. But if there is anything you wanted to share at the outset, wanted to give you a chance to do that.
Thank you, Board President. I think the only thing that I will share, we have 2 updates later in the agenda, but the one thing that I will share, and this is more of a plea to our parents and to our students. Several weeks ago, about 3 weeks ago now, we did send information out to students because across the country, we were beginning to see an increase in behavior called swatting. And essentially what that is students, individuals that call themselves students or individuals, period, sharing information of threats at schools. It was happening across the country in many school districts. We had several in our own school district. And oftentimes there is one threat that's taken and then it's replicated in following days at individual schools. We know the kind of challenge that threats actually cause, and it really does cause concern for families and for individual students, as well as for teachers and all other staff. Last week alone, unfortunately, we had 3 additional students that were arrested because of swatting. They made threats. At least one of those threats caused us to go into a more extensive lockdown situation at the school site. And it just sends mass panic and concern throughout staff and families. So I am asking as a plea, if our families that are watching tonight or those that watch after tonight, if you will please take a moment to talk to your children about the decisions that they are making. We realize that sometimes parents are not even aware that a child has made a call or they sent a text message or they send an Instagram message or a post, but it happens. And then it causes repercussions for not only the child, but also for the family. So we are going to continue with this plea for our students. We want them to understand the ramifications, but we really want to make sure that we're getting this word out to our greater community to talk to our students, because this is a choice that is being made that they do not have to make. And so I just wanted to share that tonight as a part of the updates.
Thank you, Superintendent Wright. So we're going to move to our next item. We're on item E on our agenda for approval of minutes. I need a motion to approve minutes from the special meeting November 7th, business meeting November 7th, special public meeting November 16th.
So move.
Thank you, Vice President Jones. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Moffitt. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The minutes are approved. Moving on to item F, we have 4 committee reports tonight. Is there a board member who would be willing to present the committee of the whole report from November 2nd? Mr. Craig, thank you.
So the committee of the whole met on November 2nd at 4 p.m. We covered our 3-month board policies, as well as going through our governance coaching, the board self-examination. We covered, again, the beginning of the year assessments with regards to our academic information there, our academic records for our students, or I should say academic data. We also looked at some of the data for discipline. We covered the board bylaws with regards to our committee structures and began the discussion on that. And that concludes the meeting, and I submit these minutes as written.
Thank you, Mr. Craig. Any questions or discussion about the committee of the whole report? Hearing none, would Mrs. Weinberg present the committee report from the November 7th Health and Safety Committee meeting, please?
Yes, thank you, President Lindy. The Health and Safety Committee met on Monday, November the 7th at 3 p.m. The attendees were, of course, the Health and Safety Committee members, administration, and staff, and of course, our CPS government liaisons. The agenda started off with our government liaisons reporting on different bills, and they also discussed that Ohio, they had the unfortunate distinction of being the only state in the country without health education standards for K through 12. Mr. Kearney also then reported that there were 121 school funding issues on the ballot for November of 2022 election. We then went on to talk a little bit more into detail about some education things, and there was an action item in which Mr. Kearney provided the committee with information about a bill regarding dyslexia. We then talked about more on the Ohio voters for the 121 school funding issues. And there was an action item in which Mr. Glover recommended, after discussing all of that, to schedule a breakfast or a reception in Columbus with the newly elected officials and former state representatives. We then moved on to Superintendent Wright discussing in-school safety, lockdown and lockout drills, in which she kind of gave a clarification of the definition of the two. Superintendent Wright reported that there had been improvement in following up with students and informing them about the drills that are happening in the buildings. She was going to look into providing notice to families that a lockdown drill occurred, as well as using robocalls as a tool in providing information. Superintendent Wright reported that every school has a crisis management plan that includes guidelines for quick mobilization. After that, we had a presentation by Josh Hardin in which they talked about athletics and extracurriculars, and then also physical and mental safety. Josh discussed the different elementary athletics and partnerships, also junior high into high school. He also discussed the Ohio State Athletic Association state tournament and some other programs that were being highlighted and promoted, and then also the introduction of some new sports into our district. I also, as the chair, inquired about mental health supports for athletes, and Superintendent Wright informed the committee that athletes have access to mental health supports that are offered in schools, and that the mental health pilot programs are being launched in partnership with the district's athletic coordinators and directors to identify additional layers of support that might be needed. We then further went on. Superintendent Wright gave us an update on student data, specific discipline data from the first quarter by schools and demographics. We kind of dug in a little bit into that. The action item that resulted from that was the committee would recommend that the data be reported on a quarterly basis and also recommend it to the board for the topic to be discussed at the CAL meetings. We then closed the meeting up. We had one person that submitted something for hearing of the public, and I submit these minutes as written.
Thank you, Mrs. Weinberg. Do we have any questions or discussion on the report from the Health and Safety Committee? Mrs. Bolton.
Yes, I'm very happy that the chair brought to the attention, as shared by Senator Kearney, about curriculum in health and what have you in the state of Ohio. While the state of Ohio did not have or does not have a statewide curriculum, I can recall through the Student Achievement Committee, probably as far back as 7 years ago, when we did not have one, our initial effort to dive into it, the initial thought was kind of to have sort of a ghost curriculum, and then it was determined by the administration and the board to actually adopt a curriculum that was associated and guided by federal guidelines. And since that time, it has also been updated since that time as well. So while the state has fallen short on that, largely because it's a political hot potato, if you will, the district did not. And indeed, it became one of the earliest adoptions as we kind of rediscovered curriculum under the leadership of previous superintendents and previous boards. So glad that that's been mentioned, and glad that it didn't prevent us from doing things that actually might speak to some of the issues that Mr. West brought up earlier tonight regarding our commitment to inclusiveness and openness and healthy opportunities for kids. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton. Mr. Morosky.
I'd just like to piggyback on that. And I too am glad that it came up, and I'm glad you brought this up, Ms. Bolton. It was about 5 years ago. It was my first year on the board in policy with Ms. Bates chairing it. And we revamped our policy to give us guidance, and we based it on the Fed guidelines. We also based it on some things that the governor at the time, Governor John Kasich, had said, who was not necessarily a fan of comprehensive health education, but he made a lot of pronouncements about having to do like drug education, et cetera. So we took his words, put them in our policy. But then I think the significant thing that is in our health curriculum policy are the terms medically and scientifically accurate curriculum. And I think that's the piece that needs to be highlighted and what makes ours stronger. And again, to harken back to Mr. West's point, if you're a student in CPS, you will, learn about families that look like yours, no matter what your family looks like. I'm proud of that work too.
Thank you, Mr. Morosky. Anything else on health and safety before we move to policy and Okay, Mr. Morosky, would you present the Policy and Equity Committee report, please?
I would love to, birthday boy. And you're President Lindy's birthday. And we'll do that later. We'll talk about it later. On November 10th, the Policy and Equity Committee met, and we discussed a lot of things, as you may be accustomed to seeing. We're going to put 5 policies in front of you all tonight for adoption, one of which is brand new, so we'll save that for later. It's a remote work policy, and similar to our anti-racism policy, and at the time, the vaccine policy, it would be the first of its kind in the state of Ohio for a public school district. But tonight on board matters, we'll be having a longer discussion about policy 5410, promotion, academic acceleration, and retention. You may recall last board meeting, or I think it was committee of the whole, I let you all know that we took that policy and sort of divvied it up. So we could talk about the issue separately. So tonight we will have in front of you the topic during board matters to talk about retention and promotion. As far as the new policy 5411, academic acceleration, we are going to bring that up at our policy meeting this Friday, and then you will see that again before the end of the year or in January. But tonight, again, just to repeat, because I do think it's important enough to repeat, promotion and retention will be discussed during board matters, and I'll be looking to my committee members to help sort of tee up that conversation. We discussed policy 5462, which we will also bring up again this Friday, so I won't bore you by talking about it too much, but essentially it's individualized graduation progression. We discussed at our last meeting that the language include all different sorts of circumstances as CPSs want to do to make sure we cover all the bases and unique lives of our students. So stay tuned for more discussion on that from us. A new policy you'll see tonight that Treasurer Wagner and our internal auditor, Lauren Roberts, are most excited about. It is the stale dated checks procedure and unclaimed funds account policy. I was very excited about this as well once I found out what it meant. And so we will give that to you tonight. It is an important policy. Ms. Wagner will be most pleased. I should say Ms. Bolton is too, as finance chair. She was quite pleased as well. Policy 2440, extended learning opportunities or summer school. Committee member Bolton had this on the agenda and expressed concern about the policy having language about tuition fees, buying books, seniors versus other grade levels, et cetera. There's a lot of wording issues that we want to address. This board, the folks who have been here with me for a few years know that I had some concern about immigrant students, a lot of whom come at the end of the school year, and then just sort of summer happens. And they're already behind, and then they get further behind. And, you know, I'm interested in what might it look like to have extended programming in the summer for immigrant students that move to Cincinnati in like April, for example. We're going to talk about that Friday, so more on that once we shore that up. Policy 9140, school relationship with parents, guardians, and caregivers, and policy 7217, weapons, we will be taking up this Friday. We teed up the conversation briefly. There's nothing to report except that we will have a discussion on Friday. And then related to that, and this goes really well with Superintendent Wright's report just a few moments ago. I had put it on our agenda 2 meetings ago to discuss student threats. And it's a trend nationally. It's not unique to Cincinnati Public Schools, which is a shame, and it's sad, and it's difficult. But the question I had a couple meetings ago was, do we have a standalone policy for student threats, or do we have procedures, do we have protocol, et cetera? And there are items, yes, and we do a good job of keeping our kids and families safe. But I posed to my members, Dr. Moffitt and Ms. Bolton, if this was something that they'd be interested in maybe crafting something new and working with the superintendent on, and everybody agreed it was a good use of our time. Superintendent Wright did attend that meeting, and she reported that her administration is working on correspondence about threats that will be sent to all parents due to the increase. The goal would be to inform students or families, about the seriousness of the threats, that they're a crime, et cetera. Committee member Moffitt recommended that student voice be at the table in order to inform this policy as well. So this will be something we take up on Friday, and I present the minutes as written.
Thank you, Mr. Morosky. I know we'll have a chance in the context either of resolutions or in that item you mentioned around promotion and retention policy in board matters to talk about much of what you mentioned later. So separate from those things, do people have any other questions or discussion around the report? Okay, thank you, Mr. Morosky. Our last committee report will come from Member Bolton, Chair of Budget, Finance, and Growth Committee.
Thank you, Mr. President. We'll have an unusually short financial committee report tonight. Some highlights and lowlights from a standpoint of dollar amounts. First and foremost, the treasurer shared with us that the general fund budget target is 562.2, so 562 million.2. And that's something we're going to be trying to hold to. Also, she shared with us the outcomes as a result and goals as a result of the board governance piece, as well as the superintendent's areas of focus, which, of course, are around those academic improvement, whole child commitment, and transportation. We were told that we're going to be doing a little bit differently in December regarding review of those contracts that we have that are over 200,000. Indeed, the superintendent and treasurer will be presenting those rather than at the budget line level, and I think that'll be able to make it much less fragmented and more comprehensive with their explanations. We have to delay the preschool finance report till December, And then also based upon something that President Sellers raised regarding some positions that had to be filled when there were some vacancies and whether or not they were being properly funded and how they were being reassigned. That was shared. And then there was a brief presentation, because we'll be doing a lot more tonight, on the evolving CLIF plan regarding those monies that are coming from the COVID period of time and funding, and how that's being absorbed into the general fund or not, and what some of those choices are available to the administration, and some recommendations or proposals, and then what the board is going to be thinking about it. Also, a restatement, another time reiterating the importance of going to zero-based budgeting, and also justifiable contracts based upon results. Then we did discuss, and it's going to be with us in December, the need for a very comprehensive list of all CPS properties, be they buildings or land, and looking at that, because that also can be able to influence some of our budget decisions, perhaps, as we look at actual transformation of some of what we do in order to meet the financial and instructional needs. Also, once again, a discussion regarding transportation and the challenges that are there for both our yellow vendors, our special vendors, and also our metro folks, and how that's all fitting together, and what is the short-term, long-term kind of strategy that we are envisioning. And then obviously the monthly financial reports, as well as several community redevelopment items for us to pass tonight. And then we did list some of our meeting agendas for our December 16th meeting. I submit and hope for approval.
Thank you, Member Bolton. Do we have any discussion or questions on the Finance Committee report? Okay, I need a motion to accept all 4 committee reports, please.
I'll make a motion.
Thank you, Dr. Moffitt. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Likely not. Treasurer Wagner, would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Bolton?
Aye.
Mr. Craig?
Yes.
Ms. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Moffitt?
Yes.
Mr. Morosky?
Yes.
Mrs. Weinberg?
Yes.
President Lindy?
Yes. Committee reports are adopted. So we're going to move now to item G on our agenda this evening, which are presentations. We have 2. First on our governance coaching work and the proposed goals and guardrails. And for this presentation, Rob, I think we have Cindy in the Blue Jeans meeting. I want to invite her in for a second. People who are joining us here in person or who are watching either live or later on, for the last 9 months or so, our board has worked with the Council of Great City Schools on a governance coaching process. We have 3 of 7 board members here are in their first year of their first term, and we have a superintendent who is in her first year. And so we thought this would be a good time to make sure that we start doing the things that are going to make the biggest difference for children. And we've been grateful for the work we've been able to do with the council these last several months. I think tonight, excited to reach, I hope, a pretty significant milestone in that work, which is the adoption of district-wide goals and guardrails that would set out a clear list of priorities for the next several years, along with some measurable outcomes aligned to each of those priorities. For my colleagues on the board, we want to make sure everyone this evening has a chance to share any comments, ask any questions, and make any proposed changes to this most recent version, which folks received, I think, Tuesday of last week. The way we're going to do that is we're going to invite Cindy to share just a few opening reflections with us. We're going to have a motion in a second to get on the floor the proposal that came out to everyone last week. And once we've done that in the discussion section, there'll be a chance for any board members to ask any questions or certainly propose any changes before we vote on the final version. So with that, Cindy, thank you for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Yeah,
Thank you, President Lindy. Happy to be here tonight, and I don't have a lot to say other than congratulations to all of you for getting to this point. What you have laid out in your draft goals and guardrails document is the result of all of you coming together as a governing team, and you all worked through the data, the student performance data, a lot of ideas from all of you. You listened to each other, and more importantly, you went out to listen to the community. So I appreciate the diligence and the thoughtfulness that went into this, and the diligence and thoughtfulness of everyone who was involved. It was a lot of work and work well done. I look forward to the continued journey as you work toward adoption and then eventual accomplishment. So thanks all for the work you've done and for getting here. And I look forward to hearing the debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy, very much. And you're going to hang around in case we have questions for you, right? We're not going to lose you for a minute. Okay.
Yep, I'll be here.
So is there a motion to adopt the draft interim goals and guardrails document that was shared last week and that is on the board docs link for this evening?
Mr. President.
Vice President Jones.
I move that we accept the goals and guardrails that that they have presented to us.
Thank you very much. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Morosky. So we now have a chance to discuss any questions, any suggestions that people might have. We're going to follow parliamentary procedure like usual, which is everyone has a chance to speak. And then I want to give everybody a chance to respond to anything you heard someone else say. I'm not sure if we're going to have zero conversation or if we're going to have a lot. But anybody has a chance to ask any question or make any suggestion. Mrs. Weinberg.
So this is the time to have the discussion if we disagree with something, correct?
You are correct.
Okay. All right. So if we look at the draft guardrails, I just wanted to kind of provide some input on the fact of, I know as we were receiving the community's input, the number one concern was the wording of the guardrails and the negative, I guess, how it is addressing it first in a negative way. Is there any way that we could possibly look at that language and maybe take that out or consider changing that into a more positive aspect? That would be my one piece of input that I would like to provide.
And just for a point of clarification, Mrs. Weinberg, can you do an example with us? Is there one you're thinking of and then language you'd like to replace it with?
There's no one particular one. I just know from the feedback it was pretty much every single one where it says the superintendent shall not. The suggestion was that we word that in a different way. So taking out the shall not. And I
Thank you,
wasn't quite
Mrs.
sure
Weinberg.
we were listening to that.
Are there other questions you want to ask or other changes you want to request? That's it. Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Weinberg. Others who have questions or comments? Mr. Morosky?
My comment will be brief in response to Member Weinberg. I think, and I heard that in my sessions too, like I said last time, I think it would be really difficult to change the wording and give the superintendent bandwidth that she needs to run the district. Because again, the will not, it's not a directive. If the directive in nature, and I think it just changes the entire spirit of things. I mean, I hear it. I heard the same thing Ms. Weinberg did for sure. And I think we took, advice from community members, but that one piece, I don't know how you change it into a more assertive statement and not have it be directive. That's just my 2 cents.
Thank you, Mr. Morosky. Anything else on your end that you want to share?
No, I think,
It's okay if not,
I think these look good.
Thank you, Mr. Morosky. Other comments or questions or proposed changes? Dr. Moffitt.
So thank you. I do have a couple of questions. Are we on the goals, the guardrails, or both?
Anything in the document that you want to ask about?
Well, the feedback that we got was 36 pages long. So I got a chance to go through, and I understand exactly what Board Member Morosky is saying about the language, but too many times was it mentioned in here that they're negative. And so I think that while we don't have to say thou shalt not, we need to come up with another way to say that, because it was, I stopped counting at 8 or 9 on page 7, that was concerning for enough people, that the language is very negative. I'll give you, it says questions about why are they shall not statements. We covered that on page 7. There's just a lot of concern from the community about that. So I think we need to look at it again. I don't know if it needs to say thou shalt not, but that was significantly represented enough as a theme to be mentioned. I didn't see any goals on partnerships. I didn't see any goals on culture and the climate, specifically with our partners, but there was also some concern from employees regarding the culture and the climate that came up multiple times, enough for it to be a theme to me. I looked at goal, like as a goal, we have had discussion previously about with regard to partnerships and even funding. I suggested we even have goals around the district shall utilize X number of minority businesses. The district shall utilize X number of local and minority businesses. We spent a significant amount of time years ago asking the previous administration to be intentional about local and minority businesses as partners within our district. And we even kind of had a process about that. So I think that we need to have some goals around that. Let's see. There was also, what?
No.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
So I just think that I don't see any goals on partnerships. I did read a couple of times that they were extremely academic heavy, and I'm not saying that they shouldn't have academics there at all, but our partnerships also impact student outcomes. And so I think we need to have some goals around the partnership, either goals or guardrails. My other question is around guardrails. So I saw on the notes that was sent out, it said that guardrails, and the mention was that we weren't voting on guardrails. So it says that the guardrail definition, and I'm going to read this for people that can't see it on the screen. I'm sorry you can't see what we're talking about. But it says an operational action or class of actions, usually strategic, not tactical, the superintendent may not use or allow in pursuit of the school system's student outcome goals. Guardrails are based on the community's values and should not undermine the school system's ability to meet the goals. Though guardrails will often require the superintendent to accomplish the goals in a different way. So when we made the comment previously about not voting on guardrails, it's a little concerning considering that we represent the community and guardrails are community values and we're not having a vote on community values. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there. That's the definition that was here for guardrail. I'm going to repeat it again. It says guardrails are based on the community's values. And so I think that what I don't see enough from these 36 pages is representation of the themes that came out from the community's voice. I heard communication, having the district be more transparent with communication. I heard partnerships significantly mentioned. And when I say significant, I mean within the first 10 pages, more than 10 or 15 times. That's a significant theme that was represented by a lot of the sessions that we heard, that there's not enough communication, that they were appreciative of the fact that we were engaging them as the board and getting their opinion, and that we need to actually increase partnerships or maintain partnerships. So what I'm suggesting is that we have some goals around that, and then also goals around within those partnerships and or vendors, minority businesses, and then local minority businesses. I don't see enough of that.
Thank you, Dr. Moffitt. Other people who've not shared yet, who have either things they'd like to ask about or things they'd like to suggest to be changed or things that they think are good the way they are. Mrs. Bolton?
Yeah. Thank you. And again, I'm sorry that I missed the committee of the whole discussion as I was on vacation. And not surprisingly, I have a number of things, and I think I shared through Ms. Davis today rather a list of items that concern me about this or that I supported about this. As a veteran school board member, I would tell you it would not be good to have a 4-3 vote on this. And I think there does need to be more general consensus and accommodation generally as we try to vote on this evening. I too was confused and heard indirectly, not directly, about whether or not we vote on guardrails or we don't vote on guardrails. I think obviously we should be voting on guardrails. I don't believe these guardrails are necessarily ready to be voted on, but I do believe the goals are. The 5 goals that have been selected and shared with the community are not remarkable. They are steady and comprehensive, and at least one or so of them, I think, could be very, very successful in reaching and eliminating some gaps that we have that we want to work through. So I think I would encourage rewording. I would encourage that Ms. Weinberg suggested regarding the negativity. That's not our language, and that's not the language that is representative of the community. I think, too, because the guardrails are so important, I think the community needs to be more involved than just prioritizing or ranking. The goals, for me, that the professionals should have more of an input than even the board or even perhaps the community about those goals. Those are instructional goals that professionals have to reach and be held accountable for. But guardrails are a statement of the community, and I think tonight I'd be happy to vote for the goals with some adjustments as to percentages, and I think they all last way too long. The last several years has taught me, let alone the last 15 years on the board, has taught me 5 years or 6 years or 4 years is a long time to make a commitment to something from that standpoint, even though these are very reasonable goals. So I would shorten the length of the time for the goals. I wouldn't change the goals. I probably have a couple of percentages along the way that I've suggested need to be changed. You all know how I feel about trying to tell, in our situation with our state report card, telling people that we're going to have 100% or 99% graduation rate. It is not possible for an urban district of great diversity and high poverty, and that is by design, very frankly, by the state of Ohio. So there's those things, but I feel real strongly this too is not a strategic plan. This is an instructional plan to be guided and implemented by the superintendent and our educators. And I'm comfortable with these goals, but these guardrails, I would hope that we would defer more to our community as we try to be their voice. And I think it's very important for the president and all of us to work toward not a split vote on something that's important. I would also say that I like the fact that we did merge, you all did merge the couple of guardrails that spoke to equitable distribution and merging 2 finance pieces together. I think that was critical, but I would add, and I think recent history of the last 3 years and COVID and post-COVID has made this essential. I still am holding on to listening to our instructors in the classrooms. I still would hold on to a guardrail that talks about attendance and family inclusion and community access to our schools. If not, this becomes an edict for the people that are the most important, the instructional folks, and that's it, versus the community, and we've been committed to this for 25 years, the community having access to our schools, wanting so hard to have the families be involved, wanting to be inclusive in our enrollment. So I'm supportive of the goals wholeheartedly, except they're too long in years. And I would really urge my colleagues to hold off on the guardrails until we can have the language more reflective of our community and our own language, and as a district, and also until we can have some more community input for those guardrails. I think the urgency is in the goals, not in the guardrails. And there is an urgency in the goals, very important urgency. And I think the guardrails begin to be part of that bridge to the strategic plan that has to be done. But I rest some of the other stuff in the items that Ms. Davis shared with you all earlier today. And again, regret that I was absent for this discussion, but I'm generally approving of the discussion and thought, to Cindy's benefit, as a person that's not really believed in very much of any of this, and you all know that, the focus groups were mind-changing and community bending, and I appreciated that opportunity.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton. So we've heard from four. Anybody who's not gone yet like to share, Mr. Craig?
Yeah, I'll be pretty brief. I wanted to reiterate a couple of thoughts that I had when kind of looking through this. I think the first is with regards to our guardrails. I think the struggle is that, you can turn a guardrail into a positive language, but what does that mean and what does it look like? And I think that's the struggle that folks who are wanting to have that in a more positive frame will have to kind of address and provide, because I've thought about it a lot, when we sat through several of these sessions, and I could not come up with a way to say something that was not a directive, to Board Member Morosky's point, that ends up becoming like a command or a demand to the superintendent, to the district, to whoever. And so I think there's maybe a way to phrase it out or frame it out, but that's something that I have not been able to do. I will state that my specialty when I was in school was math and not English. So I think there's some folks who are far better at it than I would be. I think the other thing too, the goals part, and this is where I think it was really interesting to do a lot of our discussions in our sessions is, and I kind of keep coming back to this thought, is that this is also an opportunity for us to explain what this will mean for our students as they go through, why these things are so important. I sat through a session where folks did not know why Algebra 1 was a really important thing to be measuring and monitoring until someone finally got up and said, hey, kids can't graduate without Algebra 1. And people were like, oh, well, then it makes total sense. And I think that's some of the things that we have to do with our goals. This is not just the sheet of paper that we have in front of us, but it is our duty as a board to explain how the district will be successful when we accomplish these goals, what these things will do for our students. And so, that's my two thoughts on it, is really around making sure that our guardrails are not commands or demands of the superintendent or the district or anyone else, and that we also put together our messaging so that we can communicate these things out, so that we can communicate why, when these things are accomplished, our students will be better off.
Thank you, Mr. Craig. Vice President Jones?
Yeah, I'll be brief in my comments. How do I say this? I think what troubles me a little bit is we've done a lot of work as a body. And I remember when we first started this and we had all of this white paper on the wall and everybody gave their input as to their priorities. What we ended up doing, we did a lot of work to narrow the focus down to what we as a body said were our priorities around student outcomes, not operational issues or challenges, but student outcomes. And I think we did a good job with that. And I think what we have are 5 very solid goals that focus on that. Now, the strategic plan, in my opinion, will be much more encompassing of everything that I heard everybody say, because it involves not only student outcomes, but it also involves the operational component and what have you. And yes, they are just as important as what we have here, but I see this as a much narrower focus around the things which are the most important for us at this time. So with that, I will say, I also value what the community shared with us, but I think we were always assuring the community that we were trying to capture just sort of the things that were most important to them. And I know they said a lot. They did talk about some of the stuff that I think Dr. Moffitt was saying. But I didn't get the impression that they were against this. Now, as everybody knows, I asked the question about the thou shall not. I asked the question early in the process. But what I understand about the guardrails is that we wanted to write them as non-negotiables. These are the things that are not negotiable, which is why it's written that way, which is why I think, we agreed to that. And I do agree with Ms. Bolton that not having, to have a 4-3 vote, it's not good. We should all be on the same page. But to be honest with you, I don't think we're ever going to get to a 7-0 commitment on it. I just don't believe that, because people have in their own mind how they want to see it. We got to start somewhere and we got to build on it. We have all these opportunities. We have not only this document, but we have to work on the strategic plan. We also hold the superintendent accountable based on what we've developed as part of her performance review. And there are 2 levels of her performance review. So I just don't think we're going to miss anything. So that's where I am with it.
Thank you very much, Vice President Jones. I'll share a couple thoughts here, and then if anybody's said anything that you want to respond to, I want to give people a chance to do that too, including if there are particular amendments people would like to make tonight. So in paragraph 3, strike this and replace it with this, or delete, to Ms. Bolton's point, delete the last year from everything, that it covers a shorter time period. I want to certainly invite if people don't have them, that's fine. But if people do want to make, concrete suggestions to change it, I want to invite that too. So for my part, I wanted to, in addition to gratitude to my colleagues and to Cindy and her team, I want to share how valuable I found the community engagement. We conducted, for those who have not been following this, more than 20 different focus groups. That ranged truly from students to parents to staff to collective bargaining organizations to partner organizations that we have to other city leaders, and that was in addition to a community-wide survey. And we tracked on the survey, who's responding, what share our parents, what share our staff, what zip codes are we hearing from. And it was a really diverse mix of constituents from across the entire city. And so I want to say thank you again, and just share part of the reason that this proposal has my support. And I'm also happy to talk about changes we might make to it. But part of the reason it has my support is it feels to me that it reflects the big themes that came out of that stakeholder engagement. And I wanted to list about 4 of them. One, and this was true across the survey and across the focus groups, that we heard real interest in rigor and academic excellence for every student in CPS, not just in certain schools and in every single classroom. And I think that's what this does. We heard many times about equity in funding and how important that is. This set of guardrails explicitly addresses equity in funding. I think the idea that people, and this has come up even tonight, how important it is that people feel heard and respected in our communications. And if you look at some of the interim guardrails that the superintendent is proposing here, that's exactly what we would be looking at. And then finally, the importance of career tech as a meaningful option for kids in addition to or instead of college. It came up over and over and over and over again. And that is explicitly referenced here in the goals that we have. So I probably believe that nothing will be perfect, but we can't let perfect be the enemy of the good. And so part of the reason this has my support is I do think we've done real work together with the administration, with the community, to produce something that is both clear and really meaningful. I think some of the things I want to mention, there are some things that are different about this version because of the community engagement we did. So it's not the case that what we're voting on tonight is exactly the same as the draft that we took out to the community. In addition to, I think, some of the double and triple negatives being removed so that it's less confusing. I'm not going to say that it is absent any possible confusion, but it is certainly less confusing. And that we're explicit about, I think earlier versions had phrases like minority students. And we're much more specific in this final proposal about which groups of students we're referring to. So I just want to share kind of where my support for this comes from, share my gratitude with you all again. I think one point of clarification I would offer is the proposal tonight is to vote on both the goals and the guardrails. I think what is not the piece that would get voted on are what are listed here as the interim guardrails. So wanted to make sure I shared that. And Cindy, I'm just trusting that if I'm saying any of this wrong, you will let us know. But that's a little bit about what I wanted to share. And so I wanted to ask if any colleagues want to respond to anything that's come up so far. Dr. Moffitt.
Of course I do. So I have had a suggestion sent to me with regard to the negativity of the thou shalt nots as maybe a change to the superintendent will aspire to, as an aspiration is something that can be measured rather than thou shalt not. I think it can be done. You don't have to just think that it can't be, but I just really want to have heard the community when they said that the negatives should be altered. Does that, to Mike and Brandon who have said that, does that sound better to you? Like that the superintendent shall aspire to?
Can you, Dr. Moffitt, can you just take the first guardrail? So it says superintendent will not ignore the needs of the whole child. And so you're proposing that we would change that to, can you just say it one more time?
Sorry, which one are you on? The guardrail?
The guardrail one. It says the superintendent will not ignore the needs of the whole child. And you would change that to?
I might have them out of order. So the superintendent shall aspire to be attentive to the whole child by not including opportunities to provide for, or we can keep going it. But instead of thou shalt not, it would be the superintendent shall aspire to be, because right now it's not inattentive, not including. The superintendent will aspire to foster a culture of systemic equities in disciplinary actions. I guess it's just taking out all of the negatives.
So thank you. I've noted that and we can vote on it for sure. Were there other things you wanted to share too?
I still just did, back in June when we had this initial training, I expressed that we just didn't have a goal for partners. That's what I just don't see, is that there was a goal for partners. So I don't agree that we're not going to come to a better consensus than a 4-3 vote. I think we can. I think to me, if this feels very rushed, and I don't want it to be. I am never at the point, and I've said this before, apparently begs to be said again, I'm never just definitive in my whole opinion, but I would like to feel heard. And I would like to feel that the community is heard. And when I see that partnerships is mentioned over and over and over again, I don't exactly know where to put that, but I know it should be represented. Because I don't want the community to have spent a significant amount of time with us and not see their ideas reflected. And we just presented to them something that we gave them as a draft and told them that this is going to be now the final. And it's not indicative of things that we have heard, we know we've heard. In 36 pages we've heard. So again, I want to support my colleagues. We spent a significant amount of time. I don't exactly think it has to be rushed at this meeting. We talked about having a cow and making it a voting meeting for a little bit more discussion, but I would like to see something in there regarding partnerships as well.
Thank you, Dr. Moffitt. Others who want to respond? Mrs. Weinberg?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to Dr. Moffat's suggestion. Can you just repeat the wording on that again? What did you say it was?
The superintendent will aspire to.
So I just want to say that I would agree if, let's say, we looked at all of the guardrails and we said that we wanted to replace the thou shall not with those particular words, I would definitely be able to agree on voting on this. And on a comment of saying that we may not come to an agreement on this, I'm going to slightly also disagree. I think we can come to an agreement because most of us agree on the guardrail, on the goals. Most of us agree on the guardrails. I think it's just the wording of the guardrails. So that's my input.
Thank you, Mrs. Weinberg. Others? Ms. Bolden?
I would agree that another week would reach us to a supermajority at least, and maybe a consensus. 85% of what's written here was written by 7 people and the superintendent, and to a lesser degree the treasurer, and our facilitators. It was, and it's good work. And it was well facilitated, well argued, and whatever. You take this to the community and say, well, we came up with this in a room alone with those folks, and then we shared what we came up with, which we're proud of, and it's good stuff. And then you don't even make the least issue, the least significant thing, which is that thou shalt not. That's not our language. And I'm having trouble understanding how that is less of a directive than the superintendent and board and community share this vision. Telling the superintendent, you will not do this, that's not even the way we talk to our superintendent, let alone represent the district, the people of our district who just gave us 70-some% approval and a levy. That's just not the way we talk, and it will be seen as something that is extraneous to us. I think tonight we should try to pass the goals. I really do. I disagree with Member Moffat from one standpoint. I don't know that partnership needs to be in the goals. I do think partnership needs to have, and it should, based upon community input and our commitment for 2 decades, should have a very important part in the guardrails. And I think several days of us kind of figuring out ways to get to that kind of verbiage that is more representative of the community. I think tonight we make a commitment to vote on the goals and then make a commitment to try to work as we do, whether it's in a committee or however we do so, and bring back thoughts so we can vote on the guardrails. What's the difference make? I do not want to set the superintendent or the board up for having a divided board about this commitment. This is huge. And I don't want, and I know if we vote on it, 3-4, whatever, or super this or super that, once it's voted on, we're all supposed to lock in step. That's the way it's supposed to be. But the reality is, why not wait those extra several days to work on the guardrails, vote tonight on the goals, and then come back and we can have that super majority at least, and the goals are the things that are the immediate piece. I just hate that language of thou shalt not from a directive or management standpoint. We're all in this together, and I thought that was part of the theme that Great City Schools kept giving us. As much as they centralize as much power within the superintendent, and we're coping with having this other position of treasurer and all the stuff we talked about, I just think I would recommend tonight the motion be changed to vote on the goals. I would make that one change, but I won't, as you say, die on that hill about how long we're making this commitment. And then come back after we've worked together and find some unity in the way we are setting out the guardrails. That's what I would suggest. I would really hope that we can do that.
Thank you. Ms. Bolton, Mr. Craig.
So, and I think Ms. Bolton has suggested a really good idea. I think that my concern with it is that if we're coming back to then have the same exact discussion we're having right now, that's not how that would work. That won't work.
Right.
And at the end of the day, if we are coming back next week to do that discussion, I guess my expectation was that folks would come back with the language written, distributed out to us for us to be able to have and look at and know when we're coming into that meeting. Because what we're sitting here today doing is talking about we can do it a different way, but literally no one walked in and said, this is how that language should be written other than one person. And so I think my struggle with this, and I think this is where Vice President Jones was going with it, is that I think we will certainly end up with some ideas, some thoughts, and make it pushed out there. Are we going to end up with language that says, that doesn't demand something of the superintendent that we all can agree upon, is my concern. And that's where, again, I'm willing to give that flexibility to have that discussion be done on next Wednesday.
Yes.
But I expect, because we expect of the superintendent, we expect of the staff, we expect of everyone else to do work before we get to the meeting. And I think we need to hold ourselves to that same standard, so we're not having a 4-hour meeting
Right.
on next Wednesday trying to discuss the same things that we're discussing right now. Again, I think to Board Member Bolton's point about the language with regards to the thou shall nots, again, no one at any of our sessions said we just love thou shall not.
Right.
But we also recognize there's not a great way to say something that doesn't say to the superintendent. There's not an easy way, because if there was, we all would have came up with it before today. To say, superintendent, I'm not telling you how to do this, but you got to do this. It doesn't sound any better. It doesn't sound any less like a demand.
Yep.
And so that's just my 2 cents on that part.
Thank you, Mr. Craig. Ms. Vice President Jones.
Okay. I'm gonna make my final comment because I'm getting anxious. I don't know about everybody else. I'm gonna again repeat what I heard throughout this whole interaction with the council. And I hear Ms. Bolton say this is not how we talk. And I agree, it is really not how we talk. But then if we come back next week, the thought of these guardrails, the guardrails definition is around what is not negotiable. What is it that we absolutely have to make sure that it happens or doesn't happen? Now, do I believe that we're going to come back next week and everybody's going to be hunky-dory and we're going to come back? No, we're going to still be 4-3 or 5-2 because that's just how we are. But, well, I don't believe that. We keep putting off. I'm sorry. We keep putting it off, and that's fine. I'm willing to go with the will of the board if that's the way it happens. But we just keep putting it off.
Thank you, Vice President Jones. I'm going to ask if there's anybody who's not spoken a second time who would like to speak. I'm going to share a couple thoughts here in a second. But Mr. Morosky, do you have anything you want to add? Mr. Morosky?
Just a couple things.
I'm going to ask for folks to give Mr. Morosky the floor. Thank you.
I tend to, unfortunately, no, don't take this the wrong way, Vice President, but unfortunately, I agree with the Vice President. It's not going to make any difference if we take another 3 months, to be honest. That's just kind of where I'm at. And I hear again about the language and all. I do think out of all the things that we could spend our time nitpicking, I do feel like this is getting a little much, just to be perfectly frank. And when we talk about being in this together, I actually believe, and I agree with Ms. Bolton on this 1,000%. And the whole goal of this is to be in it together. And I said this the last time, and maybe it's just for me, but the way that these are worded actually speaks to us being in this together far more than you do this, which is the way things have been. Whether we want to admit it or not, you reach out to superintendent, do this, do that, do this. This takes that out of it. And I think, that takes a lot of courage on our part, because it takes away a lot of things that maybe we're used to, or a lot of authority we maybe thought we had granted to us, which we in fact did not. And that's hard.
Thank you, Mr. Morosky. I think we've heard from everybody twice except for me, and so I don't know that I have a ton more to share. I don't think I have anything to share that has not already been said. Cindy, can I ask a question for you, and then we'll take some votes. And there'll be a chance for people. I've been listening for suggestions people have made. And so what I think we'll do is vote on a couple of those suggestions as amendments. And then that'll be a way of making sure everybody's voice is heard, but that we also get some clarity on what our next steps are. The suggested language, Cindy, around the superintendent shall aspire to instead of the superintendent shall not. Can you just speak to the pros and cons as you see that suggestion? It's something that, to my knowledge, has not come up before in one of our meetings.
Yeah, so I think I understand, and this isn't unique to the CPS community. The negative language is often something that seems confusing or isn't necessarily understood. When you do get into that positive language, even the aspiring to language, that suggests that, in my mind, it kind of makes it even less of a non-negotiable. If the superintendent is aspiring to, for example, aspiring toward equitable disciplinary treatment of students, then perhaps that possibly lets the superintendent off the hook even more than the non-negotiable statement of shall not allow inequitable disciplinary treatment to go unaddressed. The thing that I would also add to that, and I think Brandon maybe touched on it a little earlier, one of the things that the board can continue to do is to, if the negative language stays, which we would recommend that, and think of it less as negative language, but as Member Jones mentioned, the non-negotiable. The only thing that I could think of is we would recommend that the guardrail language be as it is. But yeah, so
Hey, Cindy, I'm not sure if you can hear us or not. We lost you for a second. Could you repeat the last sentence or two?
Yeah, I just said that the thou shall not language, the superintendent shall not, that language is what we would continue to recommend for those reasons, for the autonomy and freedom of the superintendent to approach accomplishing the goals without having an edict or without creating essentially a mother may I type situation, which is, even though it's negative, it is a positive thing for the superintendent to have that leeway to perform outside of those non-negotiables.
Thank you, Cindy, very much. I appreciate it. So at this point, what we've done is we've introduced the motion. We've had a second. We've had discussion. Everybody's got a chance to share. Everybody's had a chance to respond to what everybody else has said. I've been listening for suggestions in terms of that we could turn into amendments. And it does feel like one of those amendments would be to separate the vote so that we'd be voting tonight on goals, voting on guardrails on the next, we'd renotice it or notice it differently, but it would be what's currently listed as a committee of the whole meeting for later in November. I'm not saying that I am for or against that. I just think that's one idea that's come out. I think there are probably pros and cons to that. But I think in addition to that, are there other amendments people would like to vote on? So I wanted to entertain amendments to the motion that's on the floor. One amendment is to split it so that we vote on goals tonight, rails next time. And what I'm asking Weinberg?
So going back to the guardrails and the language, I would like to amend, could we just completely take out shall not and just include will not?
Can you say that one more time?
Can we take out for the guardrails, I think out of the 5, there are 3 that say shall not, and the other 2 say will not.
So that's another amendment.
That's
okay.
an amendment.
So let's see how far these get us. And so I think on the would someone like to motion that we separate the goals and the guardrails to a vote at the next meeting?
Have to amend her motion and get the second to.
That's what I'm asking for. I'm not gonna motion for it, but if somebody would like to, I want to.
What is?
It's okay. Yeah. So there's a motion that's on the floor. We're in discussion. What I'm trying to do is invite amendments to that motion based on that discussion. Sounds like one amendment that more than one person mentioned is instead of voting on that whole resolution tonight, we would only vote on the. So I'm not saying we're going to do that. I'm not saying we're not going to do that. I'm saying that people had brought that up. So if somebody thinks that's an important thing to do, I need somebody to introduce that amendment by saying I move that we split the vote. Mrs. Bolden?
I would amend the previous motion that's on to separate the vote of the goals from the guardrails.
Thank you, Ms. Bolden.
And delay that second vote to next May.
Is there a second on that motion?
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Weinberg. Now, is there any discussion? Ms.
Add reflection on us that to think that we cannot come up with something with which we all can agree when that is our purpose to do so.
Thank you, Ms. Bolden. Any other discussion? I'd just like to say, for my part, I see real pros and cons to this. I don't think this is a clear, absolutely perfect thing to do. I want to echo what Mr. Keim to share ideas. We've talked about this several different times. I am not somebody who likes to give up. So if people want to keep at it, I will support the will of the board. But I also think there's been a lot of good work put into this. And I think what we have on the table is very good. Any other discussion?
It shouldn't go to waste.
Ms. Bolden, you've had the floor. I want to see if there's anybody else.
So I gave some suggestions. Maybe I wasn't very clear. And I thought that they would be goals, but they sound like they should be guardrails. And I actually gave them. So I came to the table with some suggestions, unlike what I heard my colleagues say that no one did. But, I said I was talking about the minority businesses and the partnerships, and I gave examples. And I can bring them back. If they're to be truly guardrails, I can bring them back next week. But the ask for actual examples, I did that. So I'm happy to bring them back again if that's the case. But I don't want it to be said, okay, well, you know what, we're just delaying this. We're not going to come to the table with anything. That's not true. I came with some suggestions. And I feel like we're being a little dismissive. So ready to vote. If it's everybody else, I'm happy to support what everyone else said, but I don't want to be made to feel dismissed, like, well, nobody's doing the work. We're going to come back and not get anywhere. That's not true. So I'm happy to vote however we want to vote on the goals today. And I did give examples. If you need me to read them again, you can do that. But I brought some examples.
Thank you, Dr. Moffitt. Any other discussion on the amendment? Okay, Ms. Wagner, would you call the roll, please? This is not on the full set of goals and guardrails. This is on the amendment to vote tonight just on the goals section and to vote the guardrails section at the next meeting.
Mr. President, I just want to be
Maker just have to accept the amendment? We don't have to vote on it, right?
That's true. I think that's a question, I guess, for you, Vice President Jones. If you would like to accept this amendment.
Let's just,
Yeah.
I'll accept it.
Okay.
I don't want to accept it.
You don't have to, and there might,
But let me clarify the process. So if we take the vote, if we vote on the motion that I made, there's possible that we're not getting majority, right? I mean, majority
it could be 7-0, it could be 4-3, it could be 3-4. Yeah.
Okay. So I think I would want to vote on the initial motion.
So we do not have a motion maker who's willing to accept a friendly amendment. That is fine. That is 100% fine. We have a motion to amend, so we should vote on that amendment. So I'm going to ask our treasurer to call a vote, and just so everybody is clear, if you vote yes here, what you're saying is, I want to amend tonight's motion, main motion, so that it is no longer about both the goals and guardrails, but it is just about the goals. If you vote no on this amendment, what you're saying is you want to keep the original proposal from Vice President Jones exactly as she proposed it. Okay?
Now I am confused.
Treasurer Wagner.
Correct me, legal counsel, if I'm wrong, but I think the first motion has to be voted on. No? Even if the original motioner doesn't agree to the amendment.
We're voting on the motion.
That's correct. So it's important to me that people understand what they're voting on. So if there are questions about not debating whether it's a good idea, but just what it is, I do want to make sure people have clarity on that before they're asked to vote. Is this about clarity on what the vote is, Ms. Bolden?
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Clarity about the vote is that if we vote yes, we want the amendment to go through about voting on part of it tonight and part of it on Wednesday.
That's correct.
So if we vote yes, we're agreeing to divide the
That's
document.
correct. That's correct.
And giving it a half of it or something another chance.
That's correct. A no vote is I want to vote on the amendment as it was originally introduced. Okay. Ms. Wagner, would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Bolton?
Yes.
Mr. Craig?
Yes.
Ms. Jones?
No.
Dr. Moffitt?
Yes.
Mr. Morosky?
Yes.
Mrs. Weinberg?
Yes.
President Lindy?
Yes. So we now have an amended motion, which is on the floor, which would be to vote on the goals tonight as they are written. Does anyone have a different amendment? And I want to acknowledge this can feel like a ponderous process. It is also what our bylaws require of us, and they require that of us so that everyone has a chance to state their case and everybody has a chance to make a vote, and that we produce a clear outcome for what happens next. So I appreciate everyone working through this together. Is there a different amendment on the main motion? I'm not fishing for one. We may be able to vote on the final one. I asked if anybody would like to introduce a different additional amendment to the proposal that's on the floor. Ms. Bolden?
The elimination of the last year.
So we have a motion on the floor to make this 1 year shorter. Is there a second for that amendment? Dr. Moffitt has seconded that amendment. Is there any discussion on that amendment? Mr. Morosky?
So just for clarity from Ms. Bolton, then this would put the end date at 2026, is that right? Okay.
May I,
President Jones.
May I ask her rationale for that?
Yeah. She's asking your rationale.
What is the rationale for lessening of 1 year?
I think it's too long of a commitment to reach such a small percentage. I think, too, that we will be reviewing these periodically. And I think some of these are more urgent than waiting till 27 to reach that point. It encompasses, I don't know, 2 or more 5-year plans, and we haven't figured out our strategic plan yet, so that would be the reason. Again, I mean, it's less important to me than this other amendment that has gone through. But I think that I think COVID and everything else has taught us that.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Jones. We have a motion and a second on an amendment, basically to take out a last year on this. Do we have any other discussion? Mrs. Weinberg?
So with taking out the last year, we're making it a 3-year instead of a 4-year. Just need a clarification on that. So a 3-year?
That's correct. Any other discussion on the amendment? Okay, Ms. Wagner, would you call the roll, please?
This is in favor of the amendment?
This is, yeah, to say yes on this vote is to say we'd like it to be 3 years instead of 4 years.
Bolton?
Yes.
Mr. Craig? Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Moffitt?
Yes.
Mr. Morosky?
Yes.
Mrs. Weinberg?
Yes.
President Lindy?
Yes. Last call, any amendments? Okay, so Ms. Wagner, would you call this is now the main motion. A yes vote means you're voting to adopt the draft goals as amended. And the amendment is striking that last year. So you're voting to accept the goals as 3-year goals. Any questions about what people are voting on? Ms. Wagner, would you call the roll, please?
No motioner and a seconder for that? No? Okay. Ms. Bolton?
Yes.
Mr. Craig?
Yes.
Ms. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Moffitt?
Yes.
Mr. Morosky?
Yes.
Mrs. Weinberg?
Yes.
President Lindy?
Yes, motion carries. Okay.
Drum roll.
7-0. Thank you, everyone. What we have, I want to ask the superintendent here. As I'm trying to get caught up just from the last couple of minutes, everybody. Was there a message about guests at all in the order of the agenda?
In the board priorities.
I think Mike, yeah, sorry.
In the last meeting, there was the request for transportation, to review transportation. The presentation was not received by the 4:30 time on Thursday. We have the presentation, but given the time, we can wait and do the presentation on the 14th.
Okay, we also do have transportation on board matters, if that's
Correct.
helpful.
It is on board matters. I think that was the ask before, I think from Board Member Bolton, I believe. And we do have Metro that's here in the audience with us as well.
And they've been sitting here long.
Okay, that's new information for me, and I wanted to make sure that we were thoughtful. I think Jen and or Treasurer Wagner and Superintendent Wright, do you have a preference as to whether we do the ESSER update next or something different? No? Okay, then we're going to just follow our agenda, and the next one we have here is our presentation from Treasurer Wagner.
We are pleased tonight to give an update on the ESSER grants that stand for the Elementary and Secondary Emergency Relief Fund. And so Superintendent Wright and I are going to jointly provide this update. If you can go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So just for the public's and the board's memory, we have 3 major grants that came through ESSER to assist us with pandemic and preparing for COVID and reacting to COVID and learning loss. We do have several other smaller grants that represent about an additional $4 million, but they're very restricted to students experiencing homelessness and students with disabilities. So the major ones we're going to talk about are ESSER 1, which is originally called the CARES Act. ESSER 2, and then ESSER 3, which is the America Rescue Plan. So in total, we've been allocated $322 million to be spent from March of 2020 until September 30th of 2024. Some of the earlier grants had earlier deadlines. So the CARES Act, the $20 million that was spent through the beginning of this past fiscal year. ESSER 2 was a $93 million allocation, and by September 30th, we'd paid out over $86 million. We had a little bit of carryover that will be applied to some of the things that we have in the third year. And then ESSER 3 is at $209 million, and we've already spent $25 million of that. So of the 321, we've spent 131, over 40%, which is far greater than most other districts. But we still have $190 million to carry us from fiscal year 23, fiscal year 24, up until September 30th of 24, which would be in the fiscal year 25 year. It has to be obligated by June 30 of 24, though. So our current estimate of the fiscal year 23 ESSER budget is $107 million, and we're going to go over some revisions that have come up. If you recall, back in August of 21, the board adopted a 3-year ESSER plan, and we have recommended revisions on specific line items, things that have changed over time. So that leaves us with $83 million for fiscal year 24. However, almost $12 million of that's already committed to some facility projects because there's the spending is split into 2 years, in 23 and 24. So that leaves us with $71 million to spend out. Next slide, please. And so here I'm going to turn it over to Superintendent Wright, who's going to talk about some of the top areas of spend.
So as we reviewed our ESSER 1 and 2 budgets that started March of 2020 through September of 22, we noticed the top 5 areas in terms of spending and what the dollars were actually spent for. Included technology, and of course much of that was to make sure that students had the resources that they need during the time that they were learning remotely. Facilities, our treasurer has already referenced a few of the items that we added in terms of facilities and facilities planning moving forward, but this would also include any kind of facilities work, facilities updates that we needed to do, any conditioning, any HVAC work that needed to be done as a part of making sure that we were mitigating the spread of COVID. The other is for summer scholars, and summer scholars goes both to the enrichment for students and the remediation for students, or under the learning loss that students could have, and how do we make sure that we are working with students around learning loss and doing that through the summer. Super subs. These are substitutes, of course, that are assigned to each school building, and they are subs that are not assigned to vacancy positions, but they are assigned to be there and available if teachers are out, if teachers are not there and they're not able to get an additional sub. And of course, we have both transportation that became a part of our expenses, as well as the contracting that we did for our nursing services. And I will share that, if you'll go back 1 second, I will share that nurses looks a little low because the first year of nursing services, the funds for nurses were taken out of the different state grant. What was this grant from the state? And then that money was taken away, so the rest was included in our ESSER funding. So as we think about where we are right now and the goals that we have around estimates for the remainder of this year, I do want to make sure that as we're talking here, this is not about recommendations that we are making for ESSER 3. This is only the updates from where we are as necessary from estimates from ESSER 1 and 2. So any carryover that we have, this is looking at monies that have already been approved, and if there are opportunities to reallocate or changes that we see based on actuals, that's what we will see the information here. We reorganized or recategorized the information to kind of align with the conversation that we've been having around academics, behavior, and culture. So it allows us to look at, as we're breaking down our numbers and what those numbers look like, it allows us to see really from those three categories where we're looking at spending the funding. So going through each of the areas, much of this, and you did receive from our treasurer the individual report in terms of the line items for the information. And much of this is carryover from projects that were started earlier. There are really only about 3 or 4 areas that we're looking to update for this year as we are looking to close the end of the year and provide students more support. So we have communication and engagement, curriculum, Department of Student Services, and in those specific areas, it covers information for continuing to work through crisis management, working specifically with our ELL population, how we're communicating with them, and continuing to increase that communication. Curriculum, of course, is the heartbeat of our work, and looking at across the board where we're looking at additional funding for curriculum. That includes support for our Montessori programs, as well as support for our world languages program. We're looking at bringing an adoption for world languages. We continued to do work last year for our science adoption, and making sure that the additional resources that students need for our ELA and our math adoptions, that we have those resources as well. Our facilities, we have 3 schools that were going through, actually that's not included in that one, but facilities is on our list in terms of the schools that were recommended from earlier that were going through updates, Hyde Park, Pleasant Ridge, and Walnut Hills. Hyde Park's work has already started. We're about 15% to completion. Pleasant Ridge's work has been bidded out and accepted, and I think that was lastly done on November the 17th, so we're in process there. And we're having to go through a rebid at Walnut Hills, but that money has been approved already by the board, so that we can continue the work that we're looking at there. Along with facilities, one of the areas in terms of that came up in terms of safety was an update that was needed for doors. So we are expecting, there was a back order on those, and we are expecting the doors to begin to show up any day now. We're really just waiting on the doors to show up, and then our facilities team will do the installation. Graduation support, again, that's for students that we're looking to graduate. We have more students that we need to graduate, and so how we're doing boot camp work with them, how we're providing additional remediation services to them, the additional services for technology. What we found for summer scholars is what we had estimated for summer scholars is not what we spent for summer scholars. And I think there was a question earlier about taking the amount of time that it did to close out in terms of summer scholars, but we do work with vendors that send in invoices, and so now we're closed with that process. So that's where we have the difference of the $5.5 million. Any other additional school support and what that school support looks like. Transportation, we are not recommending a change at all to transportation, and then any of our financial operations that we need to continue in the work that's happening there. The next is in the area of behavior, and you do have it broken down in the document that was shared with you by the treasurer in terms of what the individual areas are. The next is behavior, and in terms of behavior, we maintained looking at our health services, any additional work for any of the facilities work for under behavior area, and that included things like isolation rooms, anything that we need to do through environment and health and safety. And actually, I'm sorry, the environmental rooms were included in that as well as additional, if we needed to do additional supplies or any additional HVAC work, that's included in terms of the behavior there. Security, talent support, and the transportation of the COVID van was a decrease for us for this current estimate. And lastly, we get to our culture slides. I already spoke about the 3 schools that have facilities projects there as we think about culture of learning, a culture of respect, a culture of recognition, a culture of support. That's where we really saw that area being the most. The new requests that we've looked at in terms of the changes for ESSER 3 are really in 4 areas. One is an Algebra 1 boot camp. We realize that we have a number of students that will be taking Algebra 1 in the spring, and we want to be able to provide more services for them in the spring as they prepare for that first time assessment. We're also launching tomorrow as a part of our professional development camp for teachers, where teachers are able to sign up and get additional support as they are doing the rollout for their students. Our health and safety building audit, and here we know that we have a major facilities plan that sunset, but there was not necessarily a part of the overall planning where we could see where we audited what our buildings needed collectively to maintain the level of buildings that we have. We have amazing facilities, but knowing the time that our master's plan sunset, now there's some buildings that we need updates. There are changes that we need. And so instead of continuing to piecemeal that, I want to make sure that we're able to present to the board something a bit more comprehensive, where we have someone that can actually come in, go through all of our buildings, give us specific information about what needs to happen in terms of facilities, and an RFP would allow us to do that. Because hopefully we could get that information quickly enough so that it becomes recommendations that we're able to make for the next budget cycle and how we spend some of the opportunities that we have around ESSER funding. The upgrade to camera systems, and so this number was almost $1 million more than that until we received the information last week that we did get the second grant that we applied for the upgrade to our systems. So this number has been reduced from our initial planning because that funding, the initial set of funding that we have, will go to upgrade those systems. And so this would represent the systems that are left. And the student badge system pilot, you may recall, we've talked about this a few different times in terms of thinking about, we don't have one way to identify students as they're getting on the bus, students as they're going in and they're tardy. How are we looking collectively at where students are in buildings? And so I referenced in one of our very first meetings that our goal was really to have a badge system as a pilot. I shared with you during that time. My identified school for that right now is Hughes. And at that time it was Hughes, and it's still Hughes. Hughes is in a very active area. We have a lot of students that come through the school. And so being able to do some piloting information so we can make recommendations more collectively and more specifically around security as it comes to truly knowing who's in the building, when they're accessing the building, when they're getting on the bus, so forth and so on. So this is a project that would be done in partnership with our other partners that would allow us to have more specific information on our students. And I think we will take questions at this time.
Thank you, Superintendent Wright. Do board members have questions on the presentation from the treasurer and the superintendent? Mrs. Weinberg.
Yes, I do have a couple of questions. Thank you so much for presenting. My first question will be regarding the student badge system pilot. When are you planning on starting this?
So we currently have, as soon as we get through the approval process, we will have a RFP that will go out for that. We've actually done some additional research with several individuals that have done work that are very similar to that, because it will take several different departments to work together. Our goal would be to have, to be able to start as early as February or March, so that it would give us some opportunity to look at how we might be able to impact and make recommendations for budget moving into next school year.
And so if that's starting February, obviously throughout to the end of the school year, then providing us with an update of what data you were able to get from that.
Absolutely.
My final question is, from looking at the green sheet here, the ESSER 3 FY23 budget, there are two questions. So I looked under behavior, and I see that you have for student mental health, I think it was a $50,000, and then also under academics for ELL family support, it was also an additional $50,000. Just wanted to kind of have an idea of how did you come up with only $50,000 for those particular two?
Okay.
So it's on the sheet.
Right.
And
will
it's
you- will
under,
you share again where you're looking?
yeah, so it's under academics, the first one, where it says communications and engagement, ELL family support. And so it has there that there wasn't anything in August 2021, but for December, there's an estimate of 50,000. You see where I am? I can bring
I
it
think
over.
that was originally part of ESSER 2, and it
Correct.
didn't, because of turnover, it didn't get done, so we put it back in for ESSER 3. But that would have, the estimate would have come from the budget manager of that department.
So my question is, for the both of those two line items, what was the reasoning for only $50,000 for both ELL family support and then also for mental health, especially being that mental health is very huge and it's a huge concern within our district? I'm just curious why it's only allocated $50,000.
Right. So I think the first we would have to go back and ask additional questions around the mental health side of it. In terms of the academic support under for ELL families, that was actually what I referenced a few minutes ago around marketing support, communicating with families, making sure that we were able to have clear translation services for them and have documents that were also translated as well. So under academics, it was under communications and engagement as a part of that academics, if that's the same one that you're looking at.
It is. So my question is, for translation services, you are offering $50,000, but there's a dash. So is that dash saying that that's taken away?
No,
there's
there
no
wasn't a change.
Okay, so no
there
change.
wasn't a
Okay,
change.
so that's fine. So for translation, you're allowing $50,000. For registration and enrollment assistant, you're allowing $50,000. For ELL family support, you're also only giving $50,000. So I'm just trying to figure out, where did the amount come from?
The amount came from recommendations from the team around what's needed for ELL support, specifically as it relates to communication with our ELL families. So the ask is under academics for this one, but it's specific to ELL families around being able to communicate information with them through communication.
And one last question, when you say team, what team members came up with that justification?
So working with the ELL support team, we actually have individuals as a part of the district team that made that recommendation from the budget. I don't know if I understand what you're asking me, so let me make sure I'm answering.
So your comment was, you said that you guys made a decision. You said you and the team. So I'm just asking, what particular team? Is it just the ELL team, or is there someone else as well?
No, so for clarity, so we work together on looking at each of the line items across the board for what's been recommended and why it's recommended. And so getting information from the team that is the support team for ELL, this was a part of their requested budget for ELL to start with. Both of those items were.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Okay, no worries.
Thank you, Mrs. Weinberg, and thank you, Superintendent. Are there other board members who have questions about the ESSER presentation? Ms. Bolton.
Thank you so much for this, and just keeping everything moving all these years and whatever. It's been a monumental effort. I appreciate it a lot. Just a couple of questions. You mentioned that the Walnut Hills money had already been approved. I know that's been there, and that was for the
The dome has already been paid for.
The dome.
Through the dome has already been. This is for the cafe, the expansion.
The cafe expansion, but it's not for classroom expansions. Right. It's
Correct.
for cafe expansion.
That's right.
Not the
We didn't
classroom
approve.
that
We
we
did
had
not
originally
approve.
envisioned.
Correct. We did
Because
not
we don't
approve
have
the
that money.
additional 18 classrooms that were a part of the recommendation.
Great, thank you, or not great, but
And
unfortunately.
I said we. Let me take myself out of that. The board did not
Now, I know when
necessarily.
you like to use the inclusion, when it's a nasty
I
decision.
just want to make
I've got it.
sure,
The
you know,
board
that I
decided it. That's-
recognize it wasn't my sole decision.
No, that's how you got some of your first gold medals on that one. That was tough. The other piece is just for clarification for me, on the super subs, there's just two. The super subs, are we planning on doing it the same way, or are we doing it as once did 10, 12 years ago, which was every building had a sub that was sort of a permanent member of the staff? Are we reconfiguring or rethinking it, or?
I think
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
That the super subs is that same concept of having your own building sub, so they're not traveling from building to building carrying germs across the district.
And that was the COVID thing, but we actually
Yes.
used to have like a sub for every building and whatever.
Correct.
Okay, and that's probably what it's still going to be as you guys figure staffing. Then my last question, and just confusing to me, is this treasurer knows. FY23, which it says ESSER 3, and it says FY23. We are currently in FY23.
That's correct.
And so when we are talking about the budget that we are developing for next year, that's going to be FY24, but still ESSER 3?
Correct.
Okay, and at the end of this year, you're anticipating for FY24, the remaining money from 1, 2, and 3, or whatever it's going to be, what carries over, is going to be what total?
So there's 83 million we anticipate being left over, but almost 12 million of that is already committed to facility projects. So a net of $72 million.
So when we're talking about the FY24, we're talking about $70 million somewhere
Correct.
there or there. Okay,
Correct.
thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton. Are there any other questions for the superintendent or the treasurer on our ESSER updates? Dr. Moffitt.
I had a question. It just makes me pause a little bit that, let me try to find it on this paper. And I wish that the community could see what we're looking at on this. I'm on this form, Rob. I don't know if you can bring it up. I don't know.
I don't think he has it.
Okay, so here for the algebra, I think in the presentation, let me start with there. We had $100,000 for algebra. Is that right? The algebra camp.
For boot camp.
Okay, so I'd like to know how many students would be eligible to take Algebra 1, and then how many did you budget for with a small amount of $100,000? I just would like to, I'm wondering why we're only putting $100,000 towards the Algebra 1 boot camp, and how many students are we serving there?
So the Algebra 1 boot camp was a new ask. It's a new focus. It was not in the last information that we had at all. What we have noticed in terms of identifying the student, beginning to identify students, we would begin to do that after we take our midterm assessments in January, to then begin to work with students more specifically. It is one of those areas where we do have some additional funding in other areas, not just in ESSER, that will allow us to do the same thing. Title I, for example, for students that need additional remediation and support. So to start with, it was just that amount from ESSER funding so that we would be able to begin the rollout of what we're looking to work on with the students. In terms of the number of students that take Algebra 1, I'll pull that number up for you. I've shared that in the presentations, but I don't remember it off the top of my head, but I can pull it up.
Well, what I'm looking for is for $100,000, which to me seems very small. Are we serving 1,000 students? Or I would like to, we have a total of 5,000 students that could take that, and we're only going to service 1,000 students with $100,000. So I'm looking to see, I guess, almost the return on investment. It's a new request, but we have this many students that could go through this Algebra 1 boot camp for remediation and or preparation. And then how many are we going to serve? And it's not a negative. It's just like, wow, we're only asking for $100,000 for that, but we're asking for so much more for cameras and student badge system. We're asking 4 times as much for a badge system, but for the math, we're only asking for $100,000. So that's kind of that's where my mind is going for. You don't have to look up the number.
Okay. Let me make sure that I address that though. So because of how dollars, and I know that you know this, and you're our other budget guru with Board Member Bolton and Treasurer Wagner, but ESSER funds, it's a little more strict what we can use the funds for. Mm-hmm. In terms of thinking about Title I, we also have to do some realignment and readjusting in our Title I funds, and there's really more money that we need to spend around student support. So when we look at the monies that we have available for Title I to do student support, we can offset the request that we're making from ESSER through Title I. We cannot do that with something, for example, like the badges, because we wouldn't be able to spend it from that.
Gotcha.
So that's the main reason.
Okay, along that same line. So I guess I'm thinking, can we put more money with our ESSER funds towards things that will help with mental health, will help with remediation, will help with academics? So I'm looking at like the communications and engagement. We're only spending the ELL family support of $50,000. Is that because the need's not great there? I guess I'm just looking at how come we're not putting more towards those things since we can.
So that was one comment I wanted to make earlier. What we don't want to do is send the message that that's all we're spending on. We have $700 million other dollars that we spend on a lot of things. And so ESSER money can only be spent on things that are related to COVID or learning loss. And so the ELL money there's other monies that are being spent on English language learners and communications, but they're coming out of different funding sources.
Sure.
So this was as a request specifically or related to COVID communications for ELL families. That makes sense?
I get that, and just bear with me for a moment. I do understand. This is such limited money. It's so restricted. I'm trying to understand why we're not putting more of those restricted funds towards things that can impact academics, because we do have learning loss for our ELL students. We do have learning loss. We do need to increase engagement. So my thinking is, okay, why just 50,000? Why not 100? Why not for algebra? We do have students that have been adversely impacted by COVID with regard to algebra that need remediation and or that need, to a little bit more support. Why not put more money there? I understand we've got Title I money that partners with that. I get that. But I guess in my mind, how can badges at $400,000 be a COVID expense, but learning loss at $100,000 for Algebra 1 is less is valued at less than that? Even though, do you all understand my question? I guess I'm just trying to get it in lay terms for the public and for myself. We need to put this restricted funds towards the academic learning loss that our kids have had. And I don't see where, I see other things that are significant, but I don't see where we're putting a lot more there. So can you help me?
I'll do my best. So I think the way that I would respond to that, Board Member Moffitt, is because of the level of restrictions that we have for COVID funds, we want to maximize how we spend those dollars on things that we otherwise could not use our monies to cover. So when we think about some of the work that we're having to do, for example, with facilities, because of the money that we have through ESSER, and thinking about making sure that we have the appropriate social distancing, or we have what's necessary to mitigate the spread of COVID, we're able to spend money there from these ESSER dollars that we can't spend from anywhere else. So the goal would be to maximize as many dollars as we have, to maintain as many dollars as we have, to do some of those kinds of projects that we otherwise would be talking to the board about trying to spend from general funds if it were not for the fact that it was connected to COVID. When we think about learning loss, and we've really reorganized and pushed quite a bit more into looking at funding for learning loss, we also have a population of other dollars that we can spend around supporting students and mitigating their learning loss, that we cannot use those dollars for anything other than that. So we would want to maximize those dollars for that, and then maximize these dollars for the things that we otherwise would not be able to use these funds for.
I get it. I do understand that part of it. I just am wondering why we're just not putting more. It's not the number that's bothering me. It's we need more there. So that's all. That's
Thank you, Dr. Moffitt. Thank you, Superintendent. Do we have any other last questions for the ESSER presentation before we keep moving? I just want to say thank you to our superintendent, for our treasurer, for the presentation. I think all the questions I wanted to ask have been asked, and so I appreciate everything that you've done. Thank you very much. As we keep moving, I think Vice President Jones had a question about the agenda.
Yes, I just wanted to put this out for board consideration. We have of course, a very robust agenda, of which under board matters, there are 6 items. The first one being transportation, and I have no idea which board member put that on there. But we also have gentlemen from SORTA here. So, and I heard the superintendent say we were supposed to have a presentation or whatever. So I'm a little confused because they're here and they've been sitting here. And so is there a discussion that we need to have about transportation while they're here? Are they here just to listen or what? I don't know.
I'm certainly fine so long as there's no objection from the board to invite to do that item on board matters now. I was not aware that we were having some guests this evening, but I'm happy to.
So the presentation actually was not from them. They're here to support the presentation for the slides that were from me. During my travel, apparently those slides did not get to the 4:30 deadline for the posting of the information. So that's one of the reasons that they are here. We've been working very closely, as we know, for a period of time around the work that we're doing. We do have recommended updates, but they were not shared in advance. And so Phyllis actually has those, but they were not shared in advance.
Okay.
So that's the reason that happened that way.
So do we need to have a transportation conversation under board matters is my next question.
I think we'll certainly have transportation under board matters this evening. And if a majority of board members would like to change our agenda to do that before we do our resolutions, it's certainly great with me. But I want to just make sure that there's no objections to that.
So you want me to do the actual presentation? There are 3 slides.
So I think there are 2 different things that people are making reference to. What I think Board Member Jones referenced was transportation under board matters.
Yeah.
I think what is separate from that was a presentation that did not come out to people. Now, I think there are pros and cons and I think that if we have some great information to share, I would default to why not share it with folks. I just want to acknowledge that that's a little bit different from people having had a chance to review it ahead of time. And I think what's behind all of this is a desire to respect people's time and effort. And show a tremendous amount of gratitude. So I think what we should do is certainly invite that presentation, and then also at the same time, board members who had questions they wanted to ask about transportation. Let's do that, and then we'll move into our resolutions. So I want to start. I think. Superintendent, I think if you are able to share what you have, that would be helpful, and we'll go from there. And then I'll come to other board members who have things.
Yes, so Ms. Davis is actually sharing it with you, Rob, so that you can put the information up there. So the 2 individuals that are here tonight are actually from Metro. I think it came up during the last board meeting that there could be some questions for Metro. They do watch many of our board meetings, and so they offer the opportunity to continue to work with us as we work through really what we're looking to do for our students. Very, very quickly, this is just a few updates from where we are in terms of overall with transportation. And we know that we have been working through our transportation concerns since the very beginning of the school year. We've talked quite a bit about how we got to, Rob, you can go to the next. We talked quite a bit about how we have gotten to where we are in terms of just the autopsy of what got us there. We've spent some time in our board meetings doing that. Our current status is we began the year at 35% on time performance. We're currently at about 80%, which means 20% of the students are not reporting to school on time. Currently, our stats around our call center is about 18,000 tickets since the beginning of the school year that cover everything from information lookup to vehicle status, service complaints, so forth and so on. In terms of messaging, we've been direct messaging with CRs with parents through social media in response and sharing with transportation for a resolution. On our website, we have every communication that we've sent out around transportation and what we're able to do with those things. We hosted a media roundtable. That was an update with all of our bus contractors. That included all of our yellow bus contractors and Metro. And also we have daily bus route communications where we're reporting a number of calls has increased as bus contractors are complying with the messaging requirements. We noted about 3 weeks ago, there was a decrease with that where parents were not receiving the calls even though the buses were running late or they were not showing up on time. So recent issue has been resolved on November the 7th. There were students from 5 different schools that really were mistakenly removed from their routes. Since then, they were rerouted. As soon as we got the information and realized that that was the case, they were rerouted and the parents were informed. We have worked in partnership really since the time of our transition with Metro, hand in hand with Metro. Passes, we have about 450 permanent passes that have been delivered to all schools with an expected delivery date of December the 5th. Those were the ones that were left at this point. In terms of routing updates, we did our last update on December 4th to make certain that we're looking at improving services. We offered our 7th and 8th grade students, which I shared earlier during health and safety, but we offered our 7th and 8th grade students an opportunity after we realized the challenges that we were having with yellow bus services. We offer as an option for 7th and 8th grade students to ride the Metro, and there were several families that did take advantage of that. I did share specifically where those numbers were in another email that I shared with the board. And so we've opened up now that the semester is rolling over, we've opened up as well the opportunity for more 7th and 8th grade families to ride Metro. As a part of a follow-up conversation that we were having from the meeting with the council and our board, there was a follow-up where the council was represented, Metro was represented, SORTA was represented, and then we had board representative, board member Bolton, and I was there as well. And we were continuing to look at what else we may do to increase our on-time rates, but also to get more students to school at the time that we're looking for them to get to school. And the reality is we still need 20 buses, at least 20 drivers for that to happen. So if there are additional students that would like to ride the Metro, we want to give them the opportunity to do that. Someone in the room, I do not recall who, shared that it might be that parents are still uncomfortable with the students riding the bus. So immediately at that meeting, we asked Metro if we could do a ride along, if we could have an opportunity for families that might be considering riding the Metro that had not had experience with Metro before, if they could ride Metro. And that is happening this week on the 8th and 9th. I think we have the 6th and 7th here, but it's actually on the 8th and 9th. The reason that happened so quickly in terms of trying to make sure that happened, our goal is to try to get the families to go ahead and request to ride Metro so that we can get that information to Metro and hopefully get their cards to them before they leave for winter break. That is the goal. So that is why it was so important for us to move forward with doing those dates at that time. So as we begin to look at where we go next, we have talked about our transportation conversations, and instead of doing transportation town halls, our focus really over the next 2 months in January and February is really to do transportation roundtables so that they become more problem-solving conversations versus just conversations around what is not going well with transportation. We can go down the list and reiterate for everyone that we have buses that aren't showing up on time. We have buses that aren't showing up at all. We have families that are being rerouted weekly because we have other students that are beginning to ride the bus, or we have families that are no longer riding the bus, so that offers us the opportunity to maximize the routes that we do have. But it's weekly. So we want to make sure that when we come together to really talk about what's happening in transportation, that we're doing that from a problem-solving standpoint, and we have some information going in so that we're then able to make some asks and recommendations to the board to move forward. So in terms of overall recommendations things for considerations as we begin to go to the roundtable conversations is added buses. Right now we don't have additional drivers. And so we know that's a national shortage. It is a shortage in our area as well. We know that there are a couple of school districts that have had to close because they did not have drivers that could drive their buses, so they had to go to remote learning. The other is to reduce overall the need for yellow bus services and how we're looking at that need. So do we have are the students that are on the buses, are those the students that should be on the bus? The next is, of course, looking at our adjusting and tiering start times. There are some things that we've created for ourselves that we really have to look at as we move forward with recommendations for how we address this issue going into next year, because right now the forecast is not that there are additional drivers for next year. And so we really want to start thinking now about what it is that we do differently as we begin to have the roundtable discussions. But we know that the board school distance for last year from 1.25 miles to 1 mile. We understand that the state requirement is 2 miles. And so if there is any consideration or through conversations and getting feedback through the roundtables to look at changing that and going back to the increase, because that would then at least give us the additional in terms of the 25%. Consider attendance zones, hub and spoke options, and yellow route rollover and stops. And all of those things become specific to transportation type conversation. Hub and spoke options, essentially, I think everyone understands attendance zones. And right now we know we're doing some work with the ad hoc committee to do more conversation around attendance zones. But for 7th through 12th grade students, we have open options for them to go anywhere across the city. And so that means to most of our 52 neighborhoods, we are sending several buses to every neighborhood every day, because we have students, at least east and west, we have students that are in different areas and they're going to those school locations. A hub and spoke actually moves to a process that it would really take some conversation with our community, because our community has really been more accustomed to that almost a curb to curb service, which we've discussed before. So a hub to spoke option essentially would give hub locations where students would go and would be picked up in terms of them being transported. So that could also include some of the specialty programs where students would go to locations for transportation. And then the yearly route rollover in terms of stops, we recognize from the beginning of the year to now, at the beginning of the year, we put 4,700 students on buses that have never shown up on buses, but we had to route them to buses. And so as we've gone through the year, we've been able to continue to minimize that, because we're removing the students from the buses, but we really have to go to a process that not just rolls everybody over on a bus, but really is more specific about the students that actually need bus transportation. And this is one that is just a recommendation after having some follow-up with Board Member Moffitt. There is the conversation around, we talk about 80% or 85% of the students are on time, but that also means that 20% or 15% of the students are not. So what's happening to those students? And one of the things that we offer to our charter school families around transportation is, if we're not able to provide transportation for them, or if they choose to provide their own transportation, they can receive pay in lieu of transportation. And that may be a consideration for some of our families that are currently transporting their students to school already, but giving them the opportunity for pay in lieu. So we have done some communication with the Department of Education. I've had some follow-up with our general counsel around that particular space, and it could offer us an option and an opportunity for those families as one more way to give them a way to continue to provide services for the students. So our next steps are continued feedback through the roundtables. We have the roundtable dates that are listed. We start in January 10th, 18th, February 8th, February 18th, here at our Ed Center in the banquet room. Those will be open, and we will be recruiting individuals to attend those. Several of the families that have emailed us, because the reality is this is not an easy resolve. And so us just saying that we're going to resolve it is not the resolve.
Thank you, Superintendent. Thanks, everybody, also for recognizing this is a long meeting this evening, and that we have a couple more things to do before we break for the night. I just want to say thank you to my colleagues and to our guests and to our staff. Questions that we have for the superintendent. Mrs. Weinberg.
2 questions, really quick, in terms of thank you for providing those dates for the transportation roundtable. You said that it would be open to the community. Will you have representatives from Metro yellow buses there and present at those particular meetings, or is it just going to be you and the community that's coming in with their complaints?
Thank you. So actually, the reason that we changed the sessions from town halls to roundtables were to not just get complaints. So our goal would be, it will be actually done in partnership with our operations team as well. And we will start with some of the current conditions that we have, because we do know that there are several that have concerns, but they don't know the current conditions and the parameters that we're working with. So our goal would be to start from that space and use those times as problem-solving sessions, recommendations, so that we can then take all of those recommendations, review them in terms of feasibility while we work in partnership with individuals that really can help us with the overhaul, and then we're able to come back to the board with better suggestions moving forward.
Thank you. And then in regards to your parent ride-along, how are you going to measure, I guess, their participation or their perspective? Is there a plan to get feedback from them, or are you expecting for them to attend the community roundtable?
Honestly, the only purpose of the ride-along was to allow families that did not have any interaction with the bus, that might be considering the bus, to ride the bus. So that if they then chose to have their 7th or 8th grade child ride the bus, they would complete the link that we've already sent all 7th and 8th grade families to say that yes, they wanted their child to ride the bus. We will continue, because there had been some concern out there about students riding, and I do need to add that our 7th and 8th grade students ride Metro in the afternoon for transportation. But we do plan to, as we move forward, to work with students and families that are riding Metro, that have found it as an option, so that we can do more just support and information around riding Metro, so that we also dispel some of the concern that people may have around safety. So it really is not as much for us to get information back on that as it is to give parents an option to see if they want to ride the bus.
Thank you.
Other questions? Mr. Morosky.
Thank you, President Lindy. Thanks for the presentation. Thanks to our friends from Metro for being here very much. So I love the parent ride-along idea quite a bit. And my 3-year-old son's ridden the Metro more than me, I'm embarrassed to say already, because of his mom. So he's good to go. But for parents that may want to do that, that can't, and this is not something we're going to figure out tonight. You can tell you know where I'm going with this. You probably do
I know
too.
where you're going.
Like an on-demand almost kind of service, like, this time I get off work, I work this shift, but I'm thinking about it. Can I set up a time with CPS or with Metro or some to ride the bus just for a couple routes?
So one of the conversations that we have had with Mr. Haley, who really has done anything that we've asked him to do, and this was not, that the goal was to get the opportunity for families to ride as quickly as possible. So that means Metro takes a chance, right? Yeah. Because there's not anything that we're giving to them. We're not giving them a pass. We're not giving them a card, because the goal was to be able to get families onto the bus as quickly as they could be and not have the added barrier of them having to get something from the school or get something from us to do that. And so we have had conversation about moving forward. So they're just sharing with their drivers on those days that if individuals show up and they say that they're riding because they're a CPS parent and they're doing a ride along, they're allowing them to do that. Moving forward, that is a great suggestion. We had talked to communications about that as well. And so we will add a specific link for a request on our website that says if you're interested in scheduling a time that you can ride the bus, we would then work through that with Metro and make sure that they have a pass, but that would take a little longer because it would not be as open and the drivers wouldn't have the information to start with.
Cool, appreciate that. I also really appreciated the list of potential solutions for our woes. So something to chew on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moraski. Vice President Jones.
Yeah, just very quickly, thank you. I really appreciate this tonight. I think we needed to have it, and I appreciate the folks from SORTA being here too. The board continues to get an onslaught of emails from families that have issues, and I want some assurance. We can give them to you or whatever, or redirect them, whatever we do. But the number, it's not as much as it was in the beginning of the year, but it's a steady and continual flow. And the comments, though, that they're making is that they're not getting phone calls back. And so I would like to make you aware of that, and so that we have assurance that at least the district is doing whatever it needs to do to contact these families to answer their calls. And I would say, and I don't know where the call is going, customer service or directly to transportation or whatever, but I think that, people want to feel like that their questions are being addressed and what have you. So that's just been my experience with it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Jones. Dr. Moffitt.
So I do also want to say thanks for the presentation, because this has been informative, particularly around the roundtables that I didn't know they were happening. So now I do, and we can definitely put those on the calendar. I want to say thank you to our SORTA friends for being good partners and good stewards, and for joining us today and sitting for 3 hours to get to your part of the agenda. Thank you. I do want to also say communication from our end. We know we cannot fix transportation with regard to hiring drivers. That's an issue. But what we can fix, I think we need to do better at, which is communication to our families. That again it came out of the goals and guardrails conversations that we just spent 36 pages discussing, in that communication on our end is not transparent, and it's not, it begs to differ from not just one or two, but particularly around this issue, it needs to be better. And I'm going to quote semi-quote my board member Moraski, in that oftentimes we think of engagement as, I put it up on Facebook, I put it up on the website, so why don't parents get it? That's not effective communication. That's not engagement. Just putting information on Twitter and Facebook, that is not enough. And so I'm going to implore our communications department, I'm going to implore our administration, there needs to be more effective and better communication around transportation, because we are getting consistent emails about it being problematic, to the point where, and I did share this with the superintendent, we've got students that still don't have bus cards. We've got students that have bus cards, but they don't work. I watched a student get on a bus, and the bus driver told me that they stopped the free rides on October 31st. And this was November 30th that happened. So again, communication is problematic. And those are things, while we can't hire drivers, we can communicate better. We can communicate differently. And we're not doing what we can do. And so I think a roundtable is great, but that's, again, us asking the community to do something. That is us providing the space, and you come to us. I don't know exactly what all the solutions are. We can brainstorm. I can give my suggestions on things that we need to do. But I also think that asking these students in real time, what are you experiencing, is one way that we can improve communication. Going to the schools, they're at school. Those that come to school, go to the school and ask them. I don't know what all of the solutions are, but I will say this: what we're doing is not enough, and it's not as effective as it can be. So that's really my ask, is that we improve that, to as a board member, be at a bus stop and to hear that the students are having to pay $2 a trip. And the student told me he has not gone to school until he got paid because he couldn't afford to ride the bus. That is problematic to me. That is an impact of learning. And we can do different. And so I don't know, but this is just not as effective and not working as it should be. So I hope and pray that we do roundtables. Those are great to say as a check mark that we did, but we need to do some other things too.
Thank you, Dr. Moffitt. Superintendent, anything you want to share?
I'll wait.
Okay.
Thank you.
Other questions from board members? Ms. Bolden?
Yeah, I really appreciate folks being here. Sorry, I don't know that we were totally aware that you were here and made sure we did other stuff. And so this has been your punishment, frankly. So I have some joy in that anyway. But at any rate, I won't talk at all about Yellow Bus, and I just want to get some things out on the table. I think first and foremost, they have finally convinced me, for whatever reasons, that there are no extra routes available to our 9 through 12 graders. I don't believe that, but you've convinced me. And partly because the federal government has threatened you with loss of funds, partly because the state legislature has decided that only CPS children can ride Metro and none of the other children can. So you've not only got us to deal with, but now you've had the federal government to deal with, the state government to deal with, as we all do too. No one, except maybe the people in this room and their families, are putting our teenagers as a priority. And I think that's very, very important. And I appreciate you've been under the gun about that as well. Whether it's the state government deciding that there's a difference between our kids and these other kids, or somehow non-CPS kids aren't allowed to ride Metro, whether they, for whatever reason, the state legislature has decided that, or the federal government can threaten you with funds, we know we have to change our entire district to make adjustments now regarding no extra routes. And we have to come to grips with that because the way we've organized ourselves is not helpful. For the Metro piece, I am interested in on time, not only at school, but a concept of on time at the stops, because that's sort of what we hear as well. Because there's a benefit to using the Metro, and it is much more cost effective than using the Yellow Bus piece, for sure. So I'm interested in, and you don't have to do it tonight or whatever, but on time, stop by stop, so to speak, or what have you. The biggest problem I have is right now is, as I think Dr. Moffitt mentioned, is this card situation. We actually have to know when our kids are getting on the bus and not necessarily where they're going, but when they arrive at school. I mean, and I don't know if the technology is there or the distribution because of some supply chain problem or whatever, but my number one priority for Metro right now is that every one of these kids has a card, and my number one priority as finance chair is to know which cards we don't need to be paying for because they're not being used, because attendance at our high school is catastrophic, especially in our Title I schools, and that's the no extra routes and what have you. But cards, the technology and the accountability that would allow us to see as we plan this next budget, so to speak. The other issue is recognizing that you too are under the gun from the federal government, state government, just like we are. And the other piece is there has to be some arrangement for our 7th and 8th graders that might be somewhat different than high schoolers. I don't know what that is, but I really hate the fact that the state government told us that we had to supply the same degree and the same quality of transportation services to all of the children of Greater Cincinnati School District, charter, private, parochial, as we do to CPS. And then the state government turned around and said, no, you don't. You have to offer this more expensive service to the non-CPS students. That is discriminatory and terrible. And I think, too, we have to not only reorganize ourselves geographically, We also have to come to grips with whether or not we can do early starts or healthy starts. We have to, as the superintendent mentioned, I don't know what we can do about high schools of choice. These are all big things that we have to arrange. But we're going to have a comprehensive solution for Metro, particularly, and then a completely comprehensive arrangement for our yellow buses and our special transport. Finally, whether the administration wants it or not, we have to also be able to provide our own darn transportation inside the school day. Period. It's one thing to blame a vendor or a partner, and when we are not doing our own internal transportation. But I welcome you being here. I'm not nearly as mad at you as I have been, because now I know people that hate us hate you. So I think, my enemy is, my friend or whatever. I don't know what all that is. But here's the deal. It has to be almost worked out by the 1st of May because of what the demands the state legislature has put on us regarding notifying our charters and parochials and privates. So there is this urgency, and it is going to have to be a comprehensive effort, and we'll have to deal with it. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton. Any last questions, comments from our, I'm going to ask Superintendent first. Yeah.
Thank you, Board President. So in the updates that I sent to the board this week, Metro was able to provide to us at the end of last week the usage across our junior high schools, our high schools, and our activity passes, as well as the individual students that have used the passes as well. So in the update that I sent to the board this week, that will be included in there as well. Sure.
Yeah, and then I want to invite, I think we have Mr. Haley, who had kindly offered to share some thoughts. So please come on down, and we'll do Ms. Bolton's question, and then I want to, Ms. Bolton, would you turn your mic on? Thank
Not
you.
usually needed, but at any rate, at our meeting with the vice mayor, I think the 9,000 number there was mentioned, and now I think that number is did I see in what you reported or what I came across, it was like 6,000?
That's about 6,505, I think, is what the number
Okay.
is.
I think
And that's included in there as well. It's included in that report as well.
Oh, yeah. Okay, good. Thank
Okay.
you. Appreciate it.
Thank you for being here, and thank you for sharing your time with us this evening.
It's our pleasure, and the students are extremely important to us as well, and it is our responsibility to get them to school safely and on time. And I'm really proud to say that our on-time performance at the schools within 5 minutes of start time is 97%, and within 10 minutes of school start time, it's 88%. So we're doing really well getting the kids to school. And in regards to the card challenge that we had, the supply chain issue, even though there were about 2,000 kids that didn't have the RFI cards, we did provide temporary cards. So every student did have a card. That supply chain problem has been solved, and all of those cards have been delivered to the school. So that issue is now behind us as well.
Thank you very much. I think we're balancing the hour, but also the rare opportunity to have Mr. Haley with us. Does anybody have a question or two they'd like to ask? We're grateful for your efforts, grateful for the superintendent's efforts.
Happy to
Mr. Craig, did you have one? Yeah.
I mean, I don't have really a question, but I want to kind of give a thought to the relationship that we have with Metro. And I was a high school student who rode the Metro to work and rode the Metro to the museum center and all these other things that I did on a regular basis. I think that part of the struggle is going to be also that we have a system that, essentially we're trying to make a lot of changes because those who were there with us, or those who are supposed to be there with us, are not there with us, right? So our federal and our state government have not been there helping in this process, and we're trying to make things that'll work. I think the other part to it, though, also is that there is some level of patience and communication that we need to improve upon, because I think, the expectation that everything would work perfectly great on the first day of school. And the reality is that a lot of the challenges that we are still facing, and I know that there's still a lot of issues, even with transportation after school and start times and all these other things that are factors that have multiple levels to them. It feels like there is at least a lot more conversation that can be built upon right now. And so I don't know if you want to maybe speak a little bit to that aspect of working as a partnership more about to fix some of these things as opposed to necessarily being adversaries in that same stance.
I will say the superintendent, Irenetta, and I, we speak on a regular basis. It has been an absolute pleasure working with her. And we're support team, you know, and she'll tell you whatever it is that we need to do to help move the kids that we're able to do, we're happy to do. And we've worked through many situations to make sure the kids can get to school on time. And we're just happy to be a partner.
I think, board member, thank you for asking the question as well. You know, as a district, when we talk about communications, we are doing much more than just putting the information on social media. Every call, all the information that we send it out through robocall to families. We do put it on social media. We put it on the school district's website. We put it on individual school websites. We have our staff that are going to homes, visiting homes, taking information to students, taking information to families. They're going to schools, delivering cards to students, following up with students. We're working with principals, and I think that at the school level, there is more for us to work through in terms of process, because we do need them to understand how important it is to not just leave a child without when they say my card doesn't work, but there would not be a way for Mr. Haley to know that, and there would not be a way for me to know that, and there would not be a way for the transportation team to know that if it's not shared from the school. And so we're continuing to work through that process. We have asked schools to provide us, because schools have to be the ones to keep up with their students that don't have cards. So we've asked them, we've had a couple of schools that have been identified as this is where a challenge is. We've asked them to provide their list that they're keeping at the school site. So it's really making sure that everyone is taking the same level of ownership in this as I know the board is taking, because the community is reaching out to you. I know that I am taking, because I'm responding to the information that we get, and the team who is continuing to reroute students daily to make sure that we are trying to get as many students on time as possible. But I do want to make sure, now we do mail information, but we've not mailed information as much because of the amount of information that we get back, because the addresses are not correct. So we also ask for any families that are listening tonight. We put this ask out on social as well. We've done this from the school. If anything is occurring and you've not in the last 5 days received some kind of outreach from CPS, please contact your school and update your information. If you opted out one time, we cannot opt you back in. And we have found a lot of success in text messages, so we are sending text messages as well. However, if the phone is not working, at the time that we send the message, they don't receive it. So we're open to whatever else we can do in terms of communication, but I did want to address that those are the different measures that really we're trying to take right now. We've also talked to Mr. Haley. He hasn't honored me on this yet, about us trying to get our own billboard on side of one of the buses, just to say, you know, call us if you need a ride, if you need more information. We're still working through that process, but we're really turning every stone that we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent. Thank you, Mr. Haley, for joining us. With that, let's challenge, I offer to anybody who'd like to accept it, to see if we could move thoughtfully and expeditiously through the remainder of our agenda by the hour, which would be about 24 minutes from now. That is ambitious, but I think we could do it if we put our minds to it. So we're going to move to our resolutions. We've done the first one already. Ms. Bolton, would you like to introduce the second resolution, please? For item number 2.
And that's the authority
is,
from Hamilton County?
That's
Yes.
correct.
Thank you. Happily, one of the more exciting of my 2 or 3 resolutions to make, a resolution requesting authority from the Hamilton County Budget Commission to file a modified tax budget for the 2023-2024 fiscal year. I motion and hope for approval.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Craig. Any discussion on this resolution? Hearing none, Ms. Wagner, would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Bolton?
Aye.
Mr. Craig?
Yes.
Ms. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Moffitt?
Yes.
Mr. Morosky?
Yes.
Mrs. Weinberg?
Yes.
President Lindy?
Yes. Mr. Morosky, would you like to introduce the third resolution?
I would. Thank you, President Lindy. This is a resolution adopting new board policy 3133, the remote work policy. I present the resolution as written.
Thank you, Mr. Morosky. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Vice President Jones. Any discussion?
Just real quick.
Mr. Morosky?
Thank you, President Lindy. Like all the new policies that we brought before you these past few years, especially with the changing nature of just the world, there's been a lot of new stuff. This one was arrived at with a lot of input from our CFT friends who are here, other folks that attended our meetings, certainly the administration. And I'd just like to thank Dr. Moffitt and Ms. Bolton for helping get it to this point, and certainly Stephanie Scott in our General Counsel Dan Hoying's office, who did a lot of the research to get to this point. And like some of the other newer policies we've done, there really wasn't a ton to research. And so she looked at other sectors, and I think we're proud of this. So we're happy to present it to you today.
Thank you, Mr. Morosky. Ms. Bolton?
Yes, I have two questions. And again, appreciate the chairman's leadership on this. On the first page in the third paragraph, I would we don't usually say this to my knowledge, I would like us to strike in the fifth line, where it's a arrangement for appropriate positions in accordance with terms of this policy, comma, the accompanying procedure. That procedure is separate from the policy. The procedure does not necessarily have the force of policy, except we've included it there. I mean, keep the rest of the job description consistent with the department and the district's needs, but that accompanying procedure, I'd like to say I'd like that just one phrase to be struck. And then on the next page, and maybe this is a question for General Counsel too, policy considerations, where we take into consideration our folks that have collective bargaining agreements, before number one. I'm just wondering if our unrepresented people are covered as well. Okay, is there a way that can be clear? If it would please the chair for that addition or change.
So let's just this sounds great. There's two requests for changes. Are they friendly amendments that are accepted by the motion maker?
Accepted.
Great. And any questions about what those just were? They seem pretty reasonable to me. Great. Any other discussion on the motion? Great. Ms. Bolton, am I cutting you off or did you get out?
That's it. Those are the two things. This is great policy.
Ms. I had one question before we call the vote. I just wanted to, I actually think it's been addressed, so I'm good. Ms. Wagner, would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Bolton?
Aye.
Mr. Craig?
Yes.
Ms. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Moffitt? Yes. Mr. Morosky?
Yes.
Mrs. Weinberg?
Yes.
President Lindy?
Yes. Ms. Bolton, would you introduce the fourth resolution?
Yes, and my next most exciting, a resolution adopting new board policy 6470.01, stale, excuse me. Stale, I was like, state? I don't think it was that. Stale dated checks and unclaimed funds account. It's a needed policy, it's important, and it is money.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Vice President Jones. Any discussion on stale dated checks? Hearing none. Ms. Wagner, would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Bolton?
Aye.
Mr. Craig?
Yes.
Ms. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Moffitt? Yes. Mr. Morosky?
Yes.
Mrs. Weinberg?
Yes.
President Lindy?
Yes. Ms. Bolton, you're also up for number 5, please.
This one is very huge. A resolution amending Board Policy 7500, Community Learning Centers. I submit and hope for approval.
Thank you, Ms. Bolden. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Weinberg. Any discussion? Ms. Wagner, would you call the vote?
Ms. Bolton?
Aye.
Mr. Craig?
Yes.
Ms. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Moffat? Mr. Morosky?
Yes.
Mrs. Weinberg?
Yes.
President Lindy?
Yes. Mr. Morosky, would you introduce the next one?
Yes, sir.
This is number 6.
Yep. So you recall we did all our family engagement community-facing policies. Ms. Bolton teed up that one. I will tee up this one. And proud to present a resolution amending Board Policy 9140, Parent Family Engagement. I present the resolution as written.
Thank you, Mr. Morosky. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Moffat. Any discussion? Ms. Wagner?
Ms. Bolton?
Aye.
Mr. Craig?
Yes.
Ms. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Moffat?
Yes.
Mr. Morosky?
Yes.
Mrs. Weinberg?
Yes.
President Lindy?
Yes. Last one for the evening, Dr. Moffat.
So I submit a resolution amending Board Policy 9142, Local School Decision-Making Committees. We just cleaned up a little bit of language, but the meat of the policy is still intact. I submit it as written.
Thank you, Dr. Moffat. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton. Any discussion? Ms. Wagner?
Ms. Bolton?
Aye.
Mr. Craig?
Yes.
Ms. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Moffat?
Yes.
Mr. Morosky?
Yes.
Mrs. Weinberg?
Yes.
President Lindy?
Yes. So moving now to the Superintendent of Schools section. Mrs. Weinberg, do we have any retirements this evening?
I will begin. We actually have 2 civil service retirements to announce this evening. Up first, I'm going to say the name is Brian Chapman, HVAC foreman in facilities. And then second, we have Janice Barnett, student services technician, Department of Student Services. And just to give a little bit of background on Janice, she has provided 44 and a half years of service.
All right.
So I think she deserves a big round of applause. And Janice is also a product of CPS schools. Just a little brief story. In the 7th and 8th grade, she attended Porter Middle School, and she was inducted into the Jenny Davis Scholarship Foundation for being an honor roll student. And this school is now Hayes Porter. Last, Janice graduated from Taft High School. She played 2 sports, volleyball and track. And she left her high school being known as the most wittiest. And this is one thing that all of the CPS employees have come to love about Janice. So I want to just say that we are wishing both of our retirees great endeavors and great success. And we thank them for their years of service.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Moffat. Mrs. Weinberg. I'm looking at Dr. Moffat here, and I'm thinking of Mrs. Weinberg here.
Oh.
Listen. I'm blaming our 3 hours and 15 minutes. So I think we may need a motion to accept the revised superintendent's recommendations. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Vice President Jones. Is there a second? Thank you, Ms. Bolden. Any discussion? Ms. Wagner?
Bolton? Mr. Craig?
Yes.
Ms. Jones?
I will recuse on recommendation 1, certificated personnel under E, and yes on everything else.
Dr. Moffat?
Yes, except for the addition that we talked about. I don't know what that is under. We talked about it.
Minus the revision.
Minus the revision to the revision.
Mr. Morosky?
Yes.
Mrs. Weinberg?
Yes.
President Lindy?
Yes. We need a motion to adopt, I think just the report of the treasurer? A motion to adopt the report of the treasurer, please.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Bolden. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on the report of the treasurer? Ms. Wagner?
Ms. Bolton?
Aye.
Mr. Craig?
Yes.
Ms. Jones?
Yes.
Dr. Moffat? Mr. Morosky?
Yes.
Mrs. Weinberg?
Yes.
President Lindy.
Yes. So as we move into board matters here, I think the meatiest of these I think we have done, which is transportation. And of the remainder, they probably vary from some that are quite quick and some that might be more substantive. I think our second one on here is from Vice President Jones around board committee structure planning.
Yes, thank you. I'll give the brief version because I know it's been a long night. Basically, we talked about the board committee structure planning and what's involved in that, and I think that is very important that we address it, if not finalize it. I don't know if we'll be able to get into a detailed discussion tonight, but even if we put it on the agenda for next week, if we have to make some decisions, I think that'll be fine. And I'm looking at the fact that there are two things. One is the January organizational meeting. We need to have pretty much anything that we're recommending for the board committee structures. It needs to go on that document, and like to have our staff work on cleaning that document up, which means not only identifying the committees, like the board leadership positions, but also committees and committee makeup, but also getting updates on the assignments. So for the organizational structure, the assignments that go on the organizational chart thing, I'm looking at Ms. Davis, but we need to make sure that anyone that has term limits, that they're identified, and if people are in those positions, put their names in those positions. So we're not bantering around who's going to be in what if they're already filled. So that's one big thing. The second thing is we made a decision that we would integrate student achievement with Cal. An issue that we've had to this point is we haven't had a lot of time to really focus on that committee and the work that needs to happen in that committee. And so we need to give some time to it, and it could actually be done either next week or even in the first meeting in January when we meet. But I think that we really need to focus some energies on working with the superintendent to decide like what the work plan is, or make recommendations to the superintendent about the work plan and the items of student achievement. We talk about student achievement items all the time, and I think there's a way we need to begin to fold in those conversations into that formal structure. So we don't have to do that tonight, but it's something for folks to think about, and we'll consider putting it on for next. It'll be on the organizational chart that way, student achievement committee of the whole, but we can talk at a later date, either the 14th or the first meeting in January, about what that would look like. And that's for the superintendent as well, because it's primarily, the Cal is primarily under her umbrella, and we would want to hear from her kind of what her thinking is as well, so that we can finalize that.
Thank you very much, President Jones. Any questions for Vice President Jones before we move on to Ms. Bolden?
Just a question. I do think it would be good to have time next week to have discussion about it, because I think we have to start turning in our interests.
Yes.
Even before the end of December to the president, and put those together. I think that would be great. I don't think it takes a great deal of time.
Okay.
But I think
Just a clarifying question, Ms. Bolden. When you say time for it on next week, is that the assignments, or is that committee structure for next year, or the Cal kind of scope for the year? Which one were you thinking of?
I think it should be the scope of Cal for next year. I think it should be whether or not we've decided to merge it. I still agree with that concept, though, and hopefully do it, and whether or not there is a health and safety. And and I think we're going to have to continue some discussion about continuing instead of sunsetting ad hoc. So, I mean, I think those should be
those
topics.
were all things that I had thought of. Yeah.
Great.
So thank you for clarifying. There was one other thing, I can't remember. Also, the balancing out the numbers of board members that serve on particular committees, since we're down one committee, what would be the balance? So we can talk about that a little bit too.
Thank you very much. Other questions for Vice President Jones? So moving on to number 3, I think this was on our agenda for the meeting that I missed and wanted to make sure it didn't get lost. This was from Mrs. Weinberg. Did you want to bring anything up here?
Yes, so I'll be really quick. Presidential responsibilities. I just wanted to open up for just a quick discussion and clarification regarding whenever we have committee meetings. At the end, our minutes are approved, not approved, excuse me. Our minutes are sent to us by Pat or Phyllis. And the question is, does the president have responsibility to approve those minutes before it being put onto the agenda for the next meeting? And I just wanted to hear some of my colleagues' thoughts on that. I know recently sometimes there has been a delay in those minutes being seen by you, which then puts a delay in, I guess, maybe me getting it back or vice versa going towards the agenda. Just wanted to hear someone else's opinion on that. And if there's no opinion, then I'll be fine with accepting that you can continue to do whatever you want to do.
Thanks, Ms. Weinberg. I'll share just a couple quick thoughts, then certainly invite responses from colleagues too. I think one of the things I'm really proud of this group for doing this year is some of the improvement around committee work. And so if people remember, go back to earlier in the year, I was going to all of the different committee meetings and asking a bunch of questions. It was Eve's favorite thing. I mean, Ms. Bolden's favorite thing, just because I think there was some confusion around how do things get on a committee's agenda. Does committee direct staff? Does a committee make recommendations to the board? And I think with so much transition, I wanted us to make sure that if a committee was acting, it was acting by making a recommendation to the board. And so when I do review the minutes, I don't approve anything. What I look for is what action has been requested. And is it clear that the action is coming from not an individual board member, but a majority of the committee members? And is it then an action that is directing staff, or is it an action in the form of a recommendation to the full board? I'm happy to say that I think only 1 or 2 times over the course of the whole year have there been any concerns on that since I started that process. So my sense is this is something that's of course it's my sense. I hope it's been helpful. If it's not something a majority of board members want to have happen, we can certainly not do it. But I do think, particularly as folks were new, getting clear on how committees act, how committees don't act, and then making sure that once they go out to people, those things are clear, was certainly my intention. But if there's a majority of people who want to see something different, I'm very happy to support whatever the majority would like to do.
Thank you.
Any other questions on that?
Mr. Morosky?
Committee chair, so I guess I should say something. We've spoken about this. I don't particularly care if you look at my minutes. You're going to see them eventually. I know one of the instances, and it really has only been a couple times, I think, and it was the creation of the ad hoc. And I won that fight, so I don't have any bad blood. No, I'm teasing, but I don't particularly care. Our minutes, they're public. So it doesn't really bother me one way or the other.
Thank you, Mr. Morosky. Any others? Ms. Bolden?
Yeah, I think it's important to state it's not an approval responsibility. And it's not that. My only concern is the impact that it might have on staff or on the folks that are writing the minutes in the first place, because we want to build in the time for you to review. I don't mind you reviewing as long as everybody understands you nor anybody else necessarily can countermand or disapprove the minutes till it gets here before the whole body.
Any others? Okay, if not, we'll move on to, I think, from Mr. Morosky around, or somebody of your choosing from the policy committee around promotion and retention.
Thank you, President Lindy. And this is a fairly meaty one. So all I'm going to ask is, and this will be for Ms. Davis, if we can get policy 5410 just sent to everybody by the committee of the whole, because actually it references the action. The actions in the minutes was that we would tee this up today, but then our committee, Dr. Moffitt, Ms. Bolton, and myself recommended that a full discussion of this policy take place in a committee of the whole meeting, which is very much student achievement. I mean, this policy couldn't be more about student achievement. Some of the high level things that came out of our meeting from my colleagues, one is Dr. Moffitt suggesting that the policy be more clear and including language about parents having the right to dispute retentions. And then another pretty high level one was, well, actually it was from Ms. Bolton directed, or gave us the idea to bring this to everybody for their feedback. So in lieu of a long discussion tonight and as per the minutes, if people could look at that and we could be ready to talk about it at committee of the whole or whenever that next meeting is. And again, when you look at policy 5410, I will just remind you that right now it is promotion, academic acceleration, and retention. As you all will recall, academic acceleration has been removed and will be discussed this Friday in policy. So when you look at this, it's pretty clear. All we're going to really ask from your feedback on is on the promotion and retention piece. And also, Superintendent Wright, and I'm, if it's okay, I asked Superintendent Wright if she does want to add anything, but also high level wise, she informed us that retention procedures are currently being updated in administrative guidelines. If you want to add anything to that. Cool.
Thank you, Mr. Moraski. Other questions or comments on this, Ms. Bolton?
I think it's a very, very important piece of our academic culture. What we basically did in that previous or existing policy is codify social promotion. And at that time, that was the view of the board and the administration. I don't know, to Chairman Moraski's point, I don't know that that is still the belief of this board or this administration. But I know among staff, instructional staff especially, that is how they read it. And indeed, it's almost no other way you can read that portion of the policy. But I'm glad we divided much of that up. So this is big stuff, and all board members were going to have a position and really talk it through.
Thank you, Ms. Bolton. Anything else on item 4 before we keep going? Mr. Moraski, I hear your request that this gets some full group airtime. And any other questions here? Okay, moving on. We're on number 5. I think this came from Dr. Moffitt. COSPA?
I do have a question for you. Now I can hear me. Under transportation, we were going to get a report from the committee meeting from Board Member Bolton. Just to go back, just to reiterate that.
Can you say that one more time?
So under transportation, we were going to get a report from what happened at the meeting, the transportation meeting with the city
previously
from Board Member Bolton.
Yeah, that's
so just
totally fine. Do you want to ask about that? Are you asking about that now?
Well,
I think it's fine because it didn't come up.
I'm at the end, so I just didn't want to forget.
No, that's fine. I think that now is fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
I believe the superintendent submitted a report to us, the things that I would add to it, some of which we added tonight, I think, which is the recognition that extra routes are not possible, that our focus now in that meeting became 7th and 8th grade. It also became the issue of funds from the federal government being threatened, which I find really surprising from a Democratic administration. But those funds were threatened, and then also a statement from the state legislature, folks that divided the kids, our kids, from the rest of the kids, which is absolutely counterproductive and intuitive to the demand that they get the same, those other children get the same services that we get. That's been changed by the state legislature. I think that the idea of the ride-along was discussed in that meeting as well as a PR effort to try to assuage any kind of concerns our parents for 7th and 8th graders had. The other piece was the assurance that was given to the vice mayor that the cards were going to be, were being distributed and were going to be able to be available to folks. Those, I think, were the highlights of that meeting. And I think, too, it would be great for us to have a discussion moving forward, whether or not there's additional, as the superintendent's pointed out, community meetings and more accessible roundtable discussions for board members and other stakeholders. I think that was part of the discussion as well. And then on Metro, we did make the case that Metro's business plan has changed, And indeed, our attendance at our high schools has declined since the absence of extra routes. And that needs to be addressed because right now it's a critical stage, especially in our Title I high schools. So I think that's a quick summary. And if I've missed anything, I'll look back over my notes and send it out. Thank you, though.
Okay, I think if we're good there, then Dr. Moffat, the next item was yours on COSPA.
Okay, well, I'm going to do this in tandem with in collaboration with my vice president. But there was an invitation to the board members to attend a consortium of state school board association inaugural national conference in 2023. I believe it's the end of March through March 30th through April 2nd or 3rd. And only 2 people responded, myself and Vice President Jones. So we would like to attend that.
Thank you for bringing it to the board's attention. Does anybody have any concerns or any reactions one way or another? Mr. Craig?
I was going to say, I thought didn't we already approve that in the treasurer's report?
What'd you say?
We approved that in the treasurer's report.
Yes, we did.
Did we?
Yes.
Just to be fully transparent, I don't know why this is on here because I didn't put it on here, but I will speak to it. That's why
I think Carolyn put it on.
I did
She
not.
wanted to
I
go
did
to
not.
Tampa.
I'm already registered.
Given
so.
the overwhelming enthusiasm for this agenda item, we're going to move on to number 6, which is the Magnet Neighborhood and High School Enrollment Lottery deadline.
But Mr. President, I want to add, I went to the first one with the vice president. It was very useful, and I think it's great that Ohio is helping lead the way, and we're helping Ohio lead the way to this new group that might be much more relevant to us.
That's great. The item came through the list that was consolidated by our board office. I appreciate, and I want to make sure anything that's requested gets some airtime. On the next one, is that Ms. Bolden?
That is me, and I've spoken, I think, in finance or whatever it was, maybe ad hoc, with the superintendent and that committee, that it would be important to try to delay for a short period of time the lottery deadlines. If we don't delay them, what will happen is that we will lose another year of being able to address any changes that we might make that already are kind of in the making. So it was a request, whether it's a delay of 2 weeks or what have you, so that we are not having people be unclear as to what they're signing up for or not. And I don't know where that went.
Superintendent?
So in reviewing the information with the team, in terms of lottery, it is the communication process for it was already in process in terms of just the dates and opportunities for the dates. What is not in process that we are able to address, and I'll also talk about it in ad hoc on Wednesday, is the items that have been raised previously around school names, around schools that have magnet boundaries that should no longer have magnet boundaries. So those things would not, the recommendation would be that they would not impact students that are already in the school, but we would not add students to those schools up under that magnet process, so that we would honor those that are already there, give them time to then move through the schooling for where they are, but that we wouldn't continue from there. So I think that we have some recommendations coming through ad hoc to address some of the concerns that we have in terms of the boundary information, in terms of the magnet process information that will get us closer to what we've discussed in ad hoc around making sure that we're looking at East and West, making sure that we're adhering to East and West, even looking at program changes, because as individuals are making requests, they're making requests for programs and options. It's not guaranteed that would be an option that they would receive.
I would look forward to a discussion in ad hoc about what you just outlined regarding particular magnet pieces and neighborhood boundaries and divisions or regions. I would also try to make the case too that anything we do is going to be grandfathered. That's the reality. But I would like us to start afresh, and at least I think I can think of at least 2 schools that should be even reconsidered regarding their boundaries. And those were ones that were raised in the north central section as a result of the Cairns boundary, and that would be the two that we've mentioned in ad hoc before in the north central part. So I would appreciate that. That's a neighborhood thing, so that wouldn't, that date doesn't matter. But again, we've sat here, a few of us have sat here and watched things that we thought were decided and then didn't get done because we missed the deadline or they didn't start doing east-west or what have you. So maybe we can talk more about that in ad hoc. But it sounds like you're moving in that direction. But anything is going to have to be grandfathered, I would assume.
So thank you, Ms. Bolden. So if we are complete on board matters, any inquiries or updates this evening before we close? Vice President Jones?
Yes, the health and safety talked a little bit about this earlier today. There is a Senate Bill 178 that's going through really quickly, and what Senate Bill 178 would do is change how the Ohio Department of Education is structured, and basically it will become sort of a department under the governor, and the governor will appoint the director as opposed to the superintendent being voted as a member of the state department. It does a couple of other things, but that's the key to that. So I'm saying that to say there's an advocacy organization called Honesty in Education that they've called a number of us, but more recently they've called me wanting to know if we want to sign on to the legislation to advocate against that, and it has to happen really quickly because I believe it's going through the House maybe December 13th. So I do have the letter format if we agree that we want to do it, and I was going to make an assignment and ask Daniel to take care of it.
Mm-hmm. Any concerns from anybody? Are people raising questions or just
an addition? As the chair, I was going to bring that up. So thank you, Vice President. I did get in contact with Dan because I wanted to hear his standpoint first to see if this would be a possibility at all for us from the board. But yes, I think it would be a good idea to kind of figure out what would the board like to do regarding this topic, and also getting the advice from Dan as well.
And then Ms. Bolden?
Yes, I would suggest that even as assignment that a resolution be drafted as well as us signing the letter. We recall, what was it, 5 years ago or so when the state legislature tried to eliminate school boards that were local school boards. So this is and we resisted that. So yes, I think a resolution for next week would be great.
So I'm going to just jump in for a second. I think I fully support everything people have said. In addition, Tim and West came earlier and spoke about a resolution before the state board, which is around Title IX, and the motion would oppose what the Biden administration is trying to do around reverting to an Obama administration interpretation that would protect trans students and be more expansive in its interpretation of LGBTQ protections. I have a feeling, though I don't want to assume this, but I think there might be support for both of these things, that we sign on to a letter or we pass a resolution that would both speak to Vice President Jones, which the bill she's referencing in the House, and also the resolution that's before the state board. I think the question I have for it might be for Dan, it might be for Ironetta, or Mr. Hoying or Superintendent Wright, is we will not meet again until the 14th of December. So we will not have an opportunity to vote on a resolution. However, I feel like we could share our intention to support a statement from the administration, or I'm trying to figure out what moves do we have to be public to our values on these issues, given the fact that we don't actually have another board meeting until after what might be the key date in Columbus. Does that question make sense?
Can I also share something?
Dr. Moffitt, yeah.
It says here under the Ohio Honesty for Education, It says possible vote Wednesday, December 7th. And it says they'll hear their testimony on Tuesday, December 6th at 3. The bill is also flagged for an amendment and possible vote on Tuesday and Wednesday. So just the urgency of us. Yeah.
It's fast. Yeah.
I'll forward this to everybody via email.
13. Yeah.
There is
But it's
another one.
Mr. Hoying.
Yeah, we can share the board's opposition to that with our lobbyists and make sure that that's at least given out to our local constituency immediately. If you want some more formal resolution, we could have it prepped for you for next week.
Any objections to us doing both of those things? Great, thank you. We appreciate it. So I guess we have a question.
I just want to add something.
Yeah.
I think it's going to have to be expedited a little more quickly. We talked to the lobbyists today, and we asked them about that. So I don't think that would be the way to go. I don't think we should go through them. I think we need to decide how we're going to expedite it on both of these. And I don't know the date. We need to verify like when it's going to be presented in the House, because I have a different date than Dr. Moffitt, I think. So we need to verify when it's going to be presented, both of them.
Point of clarification, Professor Jones, I think, are you, as I heard Mr. Hoying, we can ask our lobbyists to express the opinion of the district. We can pass a resolution. Are there other things that we could do?
Prepare a letter. We can get a letter out right away.
What's the quickest way? When you say tell our lobbyists, I didn't.
Generally, I would say something in a letter along the lines of the board discussed and express its opposition to this bill, and perhaps have the board president sign, and then maybe get that as quickly as possible to the local constituents.
I think, and that would not be to the exclusion of a resolution in the next meeting. We could do all of those things, but that would get us the fastest thing we can do, and also then next time vote on something.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you, Mr. Hoying. I appreciate it. And thank you, Vice President Jones.
So I just want to read this, that it's, and I sent this to everybody's email. I apologize for stepping in front. It says testimony, hearing, and possible vote Tuesday, December the 6th at 3. And then it says another possible vote is Wednesday, December the 7th. So I sent this to everybody via email, just so you have the info.
Thank you very much. Any other assignments? Mr. Moraski.
Just going to say for clarity with the different dates, the ones Dr. Ma was talking about are committee hearings, I believe. And then the 13th would be the full House. And it is probably going to pass. And so, you know, the fact of the matter is this state legislature, as you've heard me say many times, doesn't like our children and would just soon give all the powers centralized to a person who stands very much in opposition to the work that we do every day down here, and that's Governor Mike DeWine. And so, we can expedite this as much as we want. But I think a real power would be directing our lobbyists, I assume we can do this, to go to the testimony and give opposition testimony on our behalf. That's probably the most effective. That's just my 2 cents. And then as far as the Title IX piece, that'll also likely pass. The quote unquote good news is that that's an opt-in piece of legislation that we will not opt into. So, you know, that maybe is not as important to get done immediately because we'll have the chance to opt into it, which we won't. And we had talked about this, and we already have language in opposition to that, but I just wanted to highlight a couple of these things because we're throwing out all these dates and all this sort of thing, and it's got to go through this process. It will probably pass, and they are going to get it done before January 1st. You can bet your butt they will get it done during this lame duck. So that would be, I just say we direct them, go up there, speak against it, sign onto the letter. It's already drafted, and then keep doing what we do and hold our heads high.
Thank you, Mr. Moraski. Anything else under, we've kind of mixed some inquiries, updates, and assignments, but I think that is fine. Anything else here before we move to announcements and kudos? Announcements and kudos. Mr. Craig.
I just want to give a kudos to both Dr. Blair and Dr. Blair with West High, and then Principal Madison with Dater. Went to watch the West High Hughes game. They both were very gracious and sitting there and watching the game with me and cheering on both teams. I'm sure, we like to cheer on everybody here, but they were very gracious hosts at Westside.
Thank you, Mr. Craig. Any other kudos? Having no other business before us, I declare our meeting adjourned.